Chapter 428. Ambush Sneak Attack Pursuit. In this dark night, on this remote street, all the unforeseen events were completed in an instant. It should be said that up until now, this ambush was still a success. These black-clothed men waited until Tang, In, and the others entered the ambush and tripped the carriage. However, the situation after that was a little out of their control. The torrential rain of arrows did not achieve the desired effect, and in the end, the key figure even rushed out of the ambush. When the black-clothed men surrounded them, they found that the exposed black figure from before had completely disappeared. Only 2 or 3 of their companions were lying in the alley, and it was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Without any hesitation, the black-clothed men naturally formed groups of 2 or 3 and searched ahead in an arc. These people's movements were very clean and neat. It was obvious that they were not a group put together at the last minute. Moreover, their strength was not bad. Learning from the mistakes of their companions, they immediately released their Do Chi and covered their bodies with Do Chi armor of different colors. In other words, the weakest of the dozens of people here was actually at the level of an intermediate warrior. This kind of group was a group of people that should not be underestimated no matter where they were. But here, the dark curtain of their zombie dream was quickly lifted. Safe. There's nothing here either. When the 3-man team turned the corner of the alley, the 2 in front cautiously probed the sides and then made a safe hand gesture. After a few seconds, the 2 figures suddenly froze and suddenly turned their heads. Their companions were still standing quietly behind them. "Damn it, what are you doing?" The person on the left first sighed softly, then couldn't help but curse angrily. Since they were a well-trained team, after the 2 of them probed the front, the person at the back should naturally ensure that there was no danger behind and cooperate with the front. Under the dim night sky, the person at the back seemed to be in the wrong and did not refute. He lifted his feet and walked over. However, after a few steps, the person on the right had already started to search ahead again. The person on the left paused in place and frowned slightly as he looked at the approaching figure. It was indeed his companion, but why did he look so strange? After 2 steps, his pupils suddenly dilated. In his line of sight, his companion's head was slightly lowered and there was a deep cut on his neck. A large amount of black and red liquid trickled down his black clothes. Roar. Ding bang. Sparks flew from the collision of metal, and the sound of weapons clashing was mixed with a roar. A black shadow shot out from the shadow of the black-clothed man like a ghost. The person on the right was shocked when he heard this. He took a step forward and quickly turned around while brandishing his sword. He saw that his companion behind him had already collapsed to the ground. On the other side, a black shadow was cutting into the body of his other companion. Then, the 2 of them crashed into the wall behind them. Before he could attack with his saber, the 2 figures merged and separated in an instant. The black shadow stepped on the wall and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Damn it! It was only a few steps away, but when he came back, he saw that his companion who was leaning against the sunken wall had his eyes wide open, filled with doubt and unwillingness. On the left side of his chest, there was even a remnant of his Do Chi armor, but a large hole was enough to kill him. Hiss! After his anger subsided, the man couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air as his scalp went numb. It was obvious that their comrade had been killed when they were investigating the corner of the alley. Then, the opponent hid behind his comrade and manipulated his hands and feet to get close. Then, he attacked the other person with lightning speed and succeeded. This kind of concealment and assassination skill was already shocking enough, but the most frightening thing was that the saber could penetrate the Do Chi armor. This at least meant that the opponent's strength was not weaker than an intermediate warrior. That's not right. Thinking of this, the surviving black-clothed man suddenly had some doubts in his heart. Since the opponent's strength was obviously higher than theirs, why did he escape when he was the only one left? Over there, quick, seal him. Release the arrows. Release the arrows. Just as the black-clothed man didn't have time to recover, a series of loud shouts suddenly sounded in his ears, followed by the sound of several arrows whistling through the air. A bolt of lightning suddenly flashed across his mind. exploding arrows, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A round of arrows was rapidly shot. Some of the arrows were slightly off and hit the inner wall of the alley. These arrows were a little strange. The body of the arrow was thick and solid, and the arrowhead was tied with a small red diamond-shaped crystal. These were the exploding arrows used in the previous street raid. At such a close distance, the black-clothed man had no time to dodge. He subconsciously licked his lips. Damn it, boom, boom, boom. The so-called exploding arrow was actually a miniature version of the exploding crystal tied to the arrowhead. When it hit a hard object, the exploding crystal would explode due to the impact. Because the exploding crystal was small in size, its power was naturally limited. But now that so many exploding arrows were shot, destroying this alley was not a problem at all. As if the curtains had been pulled open, the sound of explosions was heard again and again. The poor quality window frames were shattered under the tumbling airwaves, and some of the walls of the houses that were directly hit were immediately blasted open with big holes. The residential area that had just quieted down was plunged into greater chaos, and screams rose and fell one after another. If the previous explosion on the street was a little confusing to the people here, they all looked through the windows and windows to see the situation outside. But now, when the explosion came to the side of their houses, or even the top of their heads, everything was different. These black-clothed men naturally didn't care about the lives of these people. If they were obstructed in their pursuit, they would even casually cut down a few people. Their line of sight was locked on the faintly discernible figure rushing left and right amidst the flames of the explosion. The archers had a high vantage point and covered a wide range. Under their restrictions, the black figure did not rush out of the encirclement. But the black-clothed men below who rushed up to fight in close range seemed to have fallen into a quagmire, and their numbers were constantly decreasing. Here. Damn it, surround him. Surround him. Boss, he's too fast, he's too fast. Old Third has been killed. Be careful, he's behind you. F***CK. Follow me and kill him. It was only one person, and he was still in the encirclement. It should have been a one-sided slaughter, but the actual situation was completely reversed. Those black-clothed men still found the other person's figure in the distance, but in the next moment, the cold dagger was already in front of their eyes. They fought and ran, killing with one blow, and didn't stay in one place for even a second. This was a battle that was different from the battle between martial artists from another world. There was no fierce fighting spirit, no gorgeous moves. It was just a dagger that had no selling point. Whether it was wiping or stabbing, it could solve all problems like spinning silk from a cocoon. And this was the fighting rhythm that Tang En was familiar with. The black-clothed men were not used to this kind of fighting style. They held up a sturdy fighting spirit armor and violently burst out with fighting spirit, but their attacks always missed. By the time the opponent was in front of them, it was already too late to react. They couldn't even attack, let alone use any fighting spirit. They could only watch helplessly as a simple dagger stab took away their lives. It could be said that in the eyes of those black-clothed men, Tang En was now like a god of death walking around with a scythe. As long as they aimed at the target, they could take it away at will. There was no possibility of missing. In just a few minutes, the black-clothed men's encirclement gradually slowed down. It was not completely out of fear, but as the number of people decreased, the encirclement became full of loopholes. Tang En had completely controlled the situation in the field. He no longer tried to dodge, but turned around and counterattacked. At this time, those black-clothed men realized that the originally foolproof encirclement had now become their own grave. The two sides were fighting at close range, so the archers guarding the periphery naturally had no place to use their skills. And in order to prevent Tang En from escaping, they did not dare to abandon their bows and charge in. In this hesitation, several archers suddenly fell down at the same time from a high place. This sudden change slowed the battle in the field. When they turned around, they saw the archers lying motionless on the ground. What took their lives was a straight icicle piercing through their backs. Mage! The black-clothed men paused, and then came back to their senses. At this time, they remembered that their goal this time was to kill a certain mage. Mages had an almost natural advantage over warriors in terms of fighting strength. It could be said that most of their previous preparations were aimed at the mage. But who would have thought that until now, the mage had not officially appeared in the battle, and they were completely in a passive position. While this side slowed down, Tang In seized the opportunity to rush out of the battle. He arrived at the archers' corpses in an instant, grabbed his longbow and quiver, and stepped on the roof of a small building. His fingers moved continuously, and the bowstring vibrated. Arrows were shot out in succession like shooting stars, directly suppressing the surrounding archers. Following that, he changed his direction and shot explosive arrows at the black-clothed men in the field. Tang In was best at daggers, but it did not mean that he did not know how to use a bow and arrow. In fact, his archery skills were quite good. He was not as good as the goshawk, but he was much better than ordinary people. Caught off guard, a few black-clothed men were shot dead on the spot. Under the power of the explosive arrows, the remaining men hid behind cover and could not lift their heads. At this point, the ambush was unquestionably a failure. Although the remaining black-clothed men still had a chance to get close to Tang In, they could do nothing when they thought about his speed and close-range combat ability. Following a sharp whistle, the black-clothed men retreated in all directions under various cover. After shooting a few more arrows, Tang In put down his longbow and stayed on the spot with a cold face. Although he could catch up with the black-clothed men and kill a few of them with his speed, it would be useless in the overall situation. Besides, the most important thing was Josiah, so he could not take the risk. After a while, after confirming that the black-clothed men had retreated, Tang In threw away his longbow and narrowed his eyes. He turned over and walked into an alley, then grabbed the black-clothed man who had fainted earlier and walked out. He exhaled softly and curled his lips. Interesting, I like to see who it is. Chapter 429. Night, Mountain Creek Tavern. As a normal business, the tavern naturally wasn't closed at night. In fact, there were quite a number of customers here. On average, although they couldn't make a fortune every month, they could still make a small profit. At the back door, the hidden wooden door was kicked open with the sound of galloping horse hooves. Immediately, a figure carrying a bloody body rushed in. The secret agency personnel guarding here were shocked and subconsciously jumped up to attack with their swords. However, when they saw who it was, they were stunned. Move aside, this way. Quick, go get the old doctor. What are you still standing there for? Go. Oh, right, there's a man in black on the carriage outside. Tie him up and bring him to the cellar. Remember to remove the traces outside. Yes, the backyard was in chaos. A few guards knew that something was wrong and hurriedly left. Soon after, Enoch, Dave, and a few other higher-ups who received the news rushed over. Moments later, the old doctor from the secret agency rushed over with a medicine box. In the room, there was a bronze oil lamp and a dim yellow candle flame. Josiah's face was ashen with uncontrollable sadness as he looked at the body on the bed that had been hit by a few arrows. Elder Ba, who was being examined, kept pacing back and forth, appearing very impatient. Tang In, who was covered in blood, sat at the side expressionlessly. He looked at Elder Ba, who was on the verge of death, and shook his head slightly. This kind of injury was unbearable even for someone with an abnormal physique like him. Not to mention the old Elder Ba. Although they had successfully repelled the attackers in the ambush, Elder Ba had been blown away by the shockwave from the exploding arrow and then hit by a few arrows. Now he could breathe a little because Elder Ba had instinctively avoided the attack on his heart. However, the other organs in his body had been severely damaged, and there was nothing he could do sure enough. After a moment, the old doctor finished his examination and took a step back. When he met Josiah's expectant gaze, he shook his head sadly and sighed. Bang! Josiah fell as if he had been hit by a sledgehammer. He staggered a few steps and fell back into the chair beside the bed. His face was blank. The old doctor's meaning was very clear. Enoch and the other higher-ups at the side also lowered their heads sadly, their eyes slightly red. Since the establishment of the secret agency, There had been deaths. Recently, some of them had been caught and killed by the police station. However, none of the higher-ups had ever been killed, and Elderbaugh was about to become the first. "Doctor, please think of a way. You must think of a way." Dave was the closest to Elderbaugh. He stepped forward and grabbed the doctor's arm as he pleaded. "Unfortunately, I really don't have a way." The white-bearded doctor's face was also filled with grief. He sighed helplessly. "Although Elderbaugh's injuries are not critical, these arrows are too vicious. They are all barbed arrows. Elderbaugh's internal organs were almost completely destroyed. Now we can't even take out the arrows. This is simply, sigh." After sighing, Tang In suddenly turned his head. Elderbaugh, who was lying on the bed, was completely silent. His chest was not rising and falling anymore. "Elderbaugh!" A few sorrowful cries sounded at the same time. Dave and the others threw themselves at the side of the bed. They hammered the bed and shook Elderbaugh's body. However, none of this could stop the body's temperature from decreasing. Josiah, who was in a daze, was startled awake. He looked at Elderbaugh's corpse, and his lips unconsciously opened and closed. He raised his trembling hand to cover his face, and his shoulders trembled slightly. The room was filled with a sorrowful atmosphere. The dim yellow lamp flickered and made a few faint popping sounds. It was as if a mournful music was playing and sending a departed soul away. "Who was it? Who did it? Aren't you King powerful? Why couldn't you protect Elderbaugh? Why?" After seeing Elderbaugh's eyes widen in pain, Dave's face turned red. He angrily jumped in front of Tang In and roared. Tang In raised his head and looked at the distorted face in front of him. His long and narrow eyes slightly narrowed. He then lowered his eyelids and calmly said, "Who was there when the route was drawn up last night? Who was there? King asked you a question." Before he finished speaking, a muffled bang sounded. Dave's body seemed to have been struck by lightning. He suddenly retreated back to the chair opposite him. Tang In closed in like a ghost and pressed down on Dave's face. He roared in a low voice, "Shut up." He stood up and looked at the few people who were shocked by this sudden situation. He repeated his question word by word. "I asked, who was there when the route was drawn up last night?" "We were all there." "What do you mean?" A young man reacted and asked with an unfriendly expression. "What I mean, he?" Tang In sneered and swept his gaze across the faces of the few people present. He paused for a second on Enoch's face and said again, "We were ambushed on the way back. I'm really curious. If we didn't have information about the route in advance, how did the other party set everything up and wait for us to crash into it? And they even had King demon piercing arrows. What? How is that possible?" The few people present were shocked and cried out involuntarily. Tang In's words were very clear, and it was the truth. Whether it was the route map or Josiah's identity as a magician, it was impossible for outsiders to know about it. But now, they were the only ones who were ambushed, and the other party was very familiar with the situation here. If there wasn't a mole, no one would believe it. Tang In looked at the few people in front of him coldly and said, "I want to know your whereabouts during this period of time. Also, order people to investigate and see if anyone else could have come into contact with these things." "Are you suspecting us?" Enoch said with a frown. "Everyone is suspicious." Tang In glanced over and said bluntly, "You are no exception. That's enough." Josiah, who had been quiet all this time, suddenly shouted angrily and stood up. His face was solemn. "Before this matter is investigated clearly, no one, including me, can leave this room." After a pause, he waved at the few guards outside the room and said, "You guys do as Tang In says, and do it quickly." "Yes." After the guards left, the room fell into silence again. Josiah stood in front of the bed for a long time. His eyes flashed, and he didn't say a word. Then, after a few people came in to clean up Elderbaugh's body, he sat back on the chair with a tired face. He supported his forehead with one hand and lowered his eyes. If there were no accidents, Elderbaugh's body would be smuggled out of the city tonight and buried in the cemetery outside the city. Of course, just in case, the name on the tombstone could only be engraved with a fake name. This was the final destination of all the deceased members of the secret organization. Enoch and the others sat at the table on the side and were interrogated by Tang in one by one. After Josiah gave the order, everything became simple. Moreover, this matter was indeed strange. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed to be the work of a mole. Therefore, Dave and the others cooperated with the investigation. The matter of the roadmap was decided last night. This matter was of great importance, so other than a few high-ranking officials, there were no outsiders present. Tang didn't directly participate in the discussion to avoid arousing suspicion. He only checked the roadmap at the end, so he didn't know the situation at the time. After a series of questioning, Tang couldn't help but frown. Everyone had sufficient reasons during this period of time, and it seemed that there were no suspicious points. Of course, this didn't mean that there was no problem. After all, there was no circumstantial evidence at all for special times like sleeping. Moreover, if it was done with the help of others, it wouldn't be easy to investigate. To be honest, among these people, Tang was the most suspicious of Enoch. Previously, when Enoch entered the house, he had also been secretly observing him. It could be said that he had a preconceived notion because he really didn't have a good impression of Bosco's Elvis family. Moreover, it wasn't just a matter of impression. First of all, the Elvis family had already formed a grudge with him. It was reasonable for them to stab him in the back. Moreover, Josiah took over the position of the head of the secret organization from Enoch. Moreover, he had recently seized the power of intelligence. No matter which one it was enough to make Enoch want to kill him. Of course, these were only suspicions. After all, Enoch was still a high-ranking official in the secret organization. Tang naturally couldn't kill him based on this speculation. Shaking his head, Tang secretly planned. It seemed that he still had to start with the man in black. Just as he thought of this, the guards outside the door returned. They walked into the house and bowed. "Captain, we've investigated. According to the brothers guarding the courtyard last night, no one came close to the house. However, speaking of this, there was some hesitation in his words. Go on." Josiah raised his head and said coldly. The guard nodded. "However, Peter isn't in the tavern now. Well, he might have gone out for something. But now is a special period. According to the rules, he can't leave here." "Peter?" Josiah frowned. There were too many people in the secret organization. Naturally, it was impossible for her to know the names of all her subordinates. At this moment, Enoch suddenly stood up and hammered his palms. His expression changed drastically. "I know that person. He's usually in charge of cleaning up and destroying discarded information. Last night, he seemed to be in charge of cleaning up the things we discussed." "It's him? I have a little impression of him. He seems to be quite honest." "Oh no, when we were discussing the route last night, we marked it on the map of Mountain Stream City. Could it be? Damn it must be him." Once the information was gathered, the matter gradually became clear. Peter was the most suspicious. Although he didn't enter the house at that time, he didn't hear the news. But as long as he went in afterward through the marked map and combined with the discarded information, it was still very likely that he would be able to guess Josiah's retreat route. At this time, Josiah also thought of this inconspicuous person. His face gradually became gloomy. He made a prompt decision. "Pass down the order. The tavern is closed. Everyone is transferred to other contact points. Also, when we arrive, everyone is to spread out. Even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground, you must find Peter's whereabouts." "Yes." Chapter 430. Because of the special mission of the secret organization and the singleness of its personnel, there was basically no such thing as a betrayal. But now that all the clues pointed to Peter, they naturally couldn't stay in the tavern by the stream. Josiah gave the order, and the tavern hall in front was temporarily closed. The guests were all asked to leave. Then, the internal personnel of the secret organization packed up and left urgently with some information. It was also at this time that someone found a gold note worth $1,000 in Peter's room. The truth seemed to have come to light. Without hesitation, Josiah led all the higher-ups to a contact point. The others scattered to other places and settled down a little. They urgently searched the entire city. To be honest, as the holy city of the north, Mountain Stream City was naturally very vast. Even if Peter was still in the city, with the small number of people in the secret organization, it would not be something that could be done in a short period of time. Of course, what had to be done still had to be done. After arriving at the secret contact point, Josiah and a few other higher-ups gathered again. The information on Peter was also sent over at the first moment. As an important intelligence department of the Gray Coat Army, the secret organization was naturally very strict in the selection of personnel. It could be said that they were basically all old people who had been in the Gray Coat Army Station for a few years before. And after everyone joined, they were given extremely detailed personal information. Peter was naturally no exception. But from this information, there was really too little that could be seen. Apart from age and habits, he had joined the organization early. He was in the first few batches of personnel in the station and had gone through the normal recruitment process. The higher-ups' evaluation of him was that he was honest by nature, not good at talking, and not suitable for intelligence work. But because the secret organization was in a period of large-scale recruitment, they took him in as a handyman or something. He didn't have any achievements or blemishes. During his time in the organization, not to mention outsiders, he didn't even have intimate contact with the internal personnel. Everything was very clean, like a blank piece of paper. But it was this kind of dull and taciturn person who chose to betray. The information was sent out from Josiah's hands. After the few people at the table read it, they all slammed the table and fell into silence. Based on this information, Peter should have chosen to betray us only recently. Plus this gold note. Enoch frowned and glanced at the gold note with a face value of 1,000 on the table. The other party's status seems to be quite high. "Pa!" Dave slammed the table and stood up. He said angrily, "Do you even need to ask? It must be the work of those nobles." "Commander, let's gather our men tonight and annihilate them to avenge Elder Ba." "Dave, don't be rash. I agree with you, but how did they find Peter?" "There are too many possibilities. Most importantly, this group of nobles is also divided into traditional nobles and new nobles. Did Simpson do it? I don't think they're good people. That Ronald was so attentive to us today, as if he was flattering us. Is he trying to dispel our vigilance and clear our suspicion? When you put it that way, it does make sense. Now, all the clues indicated that this betrayal was Peter's personal act. Now that they couldn't find Peter, everyone turned their attention to guessing the identity of the murderer. First of all, the traditional nobles were the first suspects. After all, they were here to cause trouble. Plus, with the 1,000 gold note, it was easy to link them to the nobles. Secondly, the new nobles couldn't escape. Just like how all the nobles didn't care about the commoners, Dave and the others didn't have a good impression of the nobles. "Commander," Dave didn't give up on revenge. He still tried to persuade the silent Josiah. "They clearly want to kill us. Since they did it first, they can't blame us for destroying the negotiations. And if we don't hurt them, there's no need to continue the negotiations." "I don't agree." Enoch shook his head and said in a deep voice, "Now, all of this is just our speculation. There's no conclusive evidence to prove that it was the other party who did it. Once we make the first move, the crime of destroying the negotiations will definitely be pinned on us. Do we have to do it just because he says so? It's not that I want to say this, but we're too cowardly. Let's also do a sneak attack. I like to see how they're going to do it." "Dave, can you calm down a little? I'm very calm. Elder Ba's body isn't cold yet. We'll take the other party's head and worship it." "Sigh, enough." Bang, the table trembled. Josiah glanced around with a cold expression and said slowly, "Let's find Peter first. As for the other things..." His voice hadn't finished resounding out when an extremely oppressive and low shrill cry resounded out abruptly. Yet it was still clearly transmitted over, and it reverberated by everyone's ears. It sounded like a ghastly wind that blew over from a boundless abyss, and it caused their scalps to go numb. Everyone looked at each other, and then they understood. This was only a contact point for a secret organization. Naturally, the area wasn't that big. Just now, Tang In carried the tied-up man in black into the next room. Now, There was no doubt that this horrifying scream was made by extorting a confession. And now that they thought about it, this scream was actually there from the beginning. However, because of the constant quarreling in the room, no one paid attention to it. We'll talk about other things later. After a pause, Josiah continued, then got up and walked out of the room. Everyone, come with me. Let's see if there's any progress on Tang's side. Naturally, no one had any doubts about this. After walking out of the room, they turned to the side. It seemed that the execution had just come to an end. When they walked over, there were no more screams. However, just as Josiah was about to knock on the door, the wooden door opened from the inside. Tang In walked out with a thoughtful expression. He looked up at the people in front of him and was slightly stunned. Then, he threw away the blood-red cloth in his hand and curled his lips slightly. You're all here. What coincidence! The greeting was very plain, but combined with the continuous and horrifying screams from before, there was too much of a difference. For a moment, everyone's expression was a little strange. Josiah quickly recovered after being stunned. Tang, did you find anything? Not at the moment. Tang In unexpectedly shook his head and shrugged. These people are not simple. They're not ordinary people. You can't force them to say anything. This time, Josiah was really surprised. Of course, she knew about Tang In's methods of interrogation. She had even unconsciously seen it several times before. It was really cruel and bloody. To be honest, every time she saw it, she was a little afraid of Tang In at that time. After that, she avoided such scenes in advance. As long as you've received professional training in this area, the general methods of extortion, such as pain and psychological intimidation, will not work. After explaining, Tang In slightly curled his lips and smiled faintly. Of course, it's only temporary. Well, do you have needles here? Needles, Josiah confirmed, then called a guard and asked him to find some. There were also many gorgeous clothes in the other world, so things like needles were naturally indispensable. Even if this contact point did not have them, they could easily buy them outside. A few minutes later, the guard came back with a box of needles of different lengths and thicknesses. Tang In picked out 10 of the thinnest needles, then looked at the people who had already entered the room and spread out his hands. Well, the scene later might be a little bloody. You guys, waving his hand, Josiah looked at the black-clothed man in the corner of the room who was covered in blood and looked dispirited. His hands and legs were unnaturally bent. Don't worry about us. Just do it. Diff at the side also gritted his teeth and said, Captain Tang, don't be polite. We're just afraid that you're not ruthless enough. Tang In looked at the people who agreed with him with a faint smile and nodded. He did not try to persuade them anymore. He walked in front of the black-clothed man, squatted down, and raised the thin needle between his fingers. Don't say that I didn't warn you. This is your last chance. Bah! He spat out a mouthful of blood and phlegm to interrupt his words, but Tang In easily avoided it. The black-clothed man's eyes were cold, and he sneered. Ha! Come at me if you have any methods. Cough, cough, but I advise you to use torture tools or something. Thin needles can only tickle me. Ha! Clap, clap. Tang In nodded in agreement and clapped his hands. Good, so damn righteous. I feel like I'm a bad guy now. TSK. Since it's like this, what are we waiting for? Come on. As soon as he finished speaking, 3 thin silver needles pierced into the black-clothed man's exposed chest at the same time. Ha, that's it. It's useless. The black-clothed man laughed wildly. He did not even bat an eyelid, and his face was full of disdain. Josiah and the others behind him also frowned. In their impression, extorting a confession was using all kinds of cruel tools to torture the body. But needles, such a burly man would be fine even if he was stabbed. What was the use of the small wounds caused by the silver needles? Don't worry, the good show is coming. Gently pinching the silver needles in his hand, his eyes emitted a strange light. At this moment, Tang In's expression was cruel, benevolent, and regretful. Someone once told me that there is a treasure in the human body. There are many locks and checkpoints outside the treasure. As long as you keep opening them, you can get many unexpected gains. He paused and rubbed his thumb and index finger quickly. 2 silver needles entered the black-clothed man's head from one side. The black-clothed man's body shook, as if he was struck by lightning. His eyes suddenly widened. Tang and picked up the other 3 silver needles. You feel it? It's normal. Where was I? Oh, there's a treasure in the human body. TSK, of course. Since there's a treasure, there must be danger. Some places can't be touched, like forbidden areas. Once you touch it, the 3 silver needles entered the man's head from the other side and then slowly went in. There will be many interesting reactions. How do you feel now? Is your head a little dizzy and your consciousness is not clear? TSK, what a tough guy. Tang Yin praised in a sincere tone. He then took out a long and thin silver needle and aimed it at the back of the man's head. There's no harm in telling you. With this needle, you'll tell me everything. Of course, that's under the condition that you're not conscious of it. Then you will die. As soon as the word die came out, the silver needle instantly entered the back of the black-clothed man's head. Then, Tang Yin quickly released it as if it was scalding and retreated like a ghost. Puff, puff, puff. As soon as Tang Yin retreated, the black-clothed man's drooping eyelids suddenly widened. His eyeballs seemed to be about to pop out of their sockets. His body, which was leaning against the wall, instantly straightened up. He opened his mouth and spat out blood 3 times. The narrow and dim room was instantly filled with the strong smell of blood. Josiah and the others stared at this scene, dumbfounded. A chill ran down their spines, and they did not recover for a long time. As the perpetrator, Tang Yin naturally would not be like this. After the black-clothed man's head drooped again, he stepped forward and asked anxiously, "Who are you?" The black-clothed man's eyelids drooped, and his lips trembled as if he was sleep-talking. I am number 13. Number 13? F***CK. What does it have to do with me if you're number 13? Tang Yin did not think and continued to ask. Who sent you? What is his name? Number 1. Sent me. He is called the butler. Butler? I'm a F***king old butler. Tang Yin frowned again and thought quickly. Where are you from? Bran City. The capital? Those aristocrats? Finally, I found something useful. Tang Yin narrowed his long and narrow eyes and continued to ask, Ronald or Simpson? No, I don't know. Who gave you the ambush route tonight? I don't know. Do you know Peter? No. At this point, the black-clothed man's body was completely bent, and he could not utter a complete sentence. Seeing this, Tang Yin shook his head lightly and took a few steps back again. This kind of needle torture stimulated an unknown area in the human brain. The effect was similar to hypnosis. The victim would be unconscious and muddle-headed while answering the questions heard. Of course, this was not omnipotent. In addition to the bad consequences, the victim was only limited to answering simple questions that came out of his mouth. He could not answer complicated questions that required thinking. Moreover, there was also a time limit. Tang Yin only asked a few questions and spent less than a minute, but the black-clothed man was almost at his limit. Josiah and the others had already recovered when Tang Yin asked the questions. Now that they saw him give up after asking a few simple questions, they could not help but feel puzzled. Enoch frowned and asked, What else? Why don't you continue to ask? Hearing this, Tang Yin curled his lips and made a gesture of invitation. He was too lazy to explain. You? Enoch's face darkened and his anger surged. He immediately went forward and grabbed the black-clothed man's hair and shouted angrily, Tell me, who sent you? Where are the others? Here. Unwu. The black-clothed man's body trembled as if he had a seizure. The 7 or 8 silver needles on his head also flickered with a little silver light. His face quickly changed between blue and white. It looked extremely strange. Tell me you're not. Damn it. Enoch's eyes flashed fiercely. He grabbed the black-clothed man's head and was about to smash it against the wall behind him. Puff, puff, puff. The black-clothed man's eyes rolled back. He raised his head and opened his mouth. Blood mist spurted out rapidly like a fountain, as if he wanted to spit out all the blood in his body in one breath. Enoch was too close and could not avoid it. He was sprayed all over and hurriedly retreated, looking very embarrassed. Chapter 431. This was destined to be a sleepless night. Just as Josiah and the others were still in awe of Tang's interrogation methods, and Enoch hurried back to change his clothes while cursing, the personnel of the secret agency who had spread out earlier reported that they had found Peter. Of course, it was just a corpse. As mentioned earlier, Mountain Stream City was very large. If the secret agency wanted to search for someone here, it was undoubtedly like looking for a needle in a haystack. But the truth was beyond their expectations. West City District, on the side of a remote street. By the time Josiah, Tang and the others hurried over, the area was already completely under the control of the secret agency. "Captain, this way." A quick-witted young man waved at the entrance of the alley. When the group approached, he pointed to the opposite side of the road. "We found Peter there." At that time, there was an ordinary horse carriage that didn't move for a long time, which attracted our attention. When we went in, we found Peter lying in the carriage, dead. After a pause, the young man turned to lead the way. "Captain, this way. In order to prevent any unforeseen events, we've already pulled the carriage inside." "Well done." Although his face was gloomy, Josiah still nodded approvingly. No one was surprised by Peter's death. First, they already knew when they received the news, so they were mentally prepared. Second, when they saw the 1,000 gold notes that were not taken away, they already vaguely knew that Peter was not going to live. The reason was simple. If Peter was still alive, he would definitely take the gold notes that were enough to let him live the rest of his life in wealth and leave Mountain Stream City in advance and fly far away. After turning a few alleys, the group came to an even more remote area. There was not even a single house around. The ordinary horse carriage was parked in the middle of the area, with several members of the secret agency guarding around it. Without hesitation, Josiah and the others held up the oil lamps at the side, opened the front and back doors of the horse carriage, and peered in. Under the dim yellow light, the interior of the carriage could be seen at a glance. Near the back was a short table and 2 benches. On the table were unfinished teacups, bottles, and other things. This was the standard equipment for ordinary short-distance carriages. In Mountain Stream City, there were at least 8,000 of them, if not 10,000. There was a small space near the front of the carriage, and a young man named Peter was lying there. His face looked honest and kind. But now this honest and considerate face looked really terrifying. His eyes were wide open, as if he was astonished and unwilling to die in peace. His complexion was also very gloomy. His lips were crooked, and specks of blood stuck to the side of his face. Tang sniffed, and his face changed slightly. He then carefully looked at Peter's face and nodded. His gaze shifted and locked onto the table beside him. Under the light of the fire, the crystal bottle with a slender neck looked rather magnificent and dreamy. "Rip." Tang simply tore off a strip of cloth from his cuff, tied a knot around the slender neck of the crystal bottle, and lifted it out. Looking at the gorgeous appearance, there was still a small amount of blue liquid swirling inside. Tang carefully held the bottle to his nose and frowned. His actions attracted everyone's attention. Unlike Dave and the others who were baffled, Josiah looked at the slender neck of the crystal bottle with a slight frown. He knocked his forehead and blurted out, "Ice flame volcano." Tang touched his nose and turned his head. "What mountain?" Josiah pointed at the slender neck of the crystal bottle and said with certainty, "This is called Ice Flame Volcano. It is a very expensive wine. It is relatively rare, and its value is definitely not less than 15,000 gold coins." Dave and the others all sucked in a breath of cold air. With their values, they could not understand how such a small wine bottle could be worth nearly 20,000 gold coins. With that kind of money, wouldn't it be possible to buy a few dozen copper coins worth of ale and drink until death? Nodding, Tang raised the bottle and shook the blue liquid inside. "Then it is really a pity. This wine is poisoned. Peter died because of this." "Pah!" Dave slammed his palm, his face twisted. "They are really willing to spend so much." "Leader, there is no doubt now, other than those damn nobles from the capital city, Who else could have this thing? His words were rough, but his reasoning was not. Combining the results of the interrogation and the black-clothed men from the capital city, Dave's inference was very convincing. Everyone was silent, waiting for Josiah to make the final decision. Tang An's eyes flashed, and he looked at Enoch, who was also angry. Tang did not deny some of Dave's points. Since the black-clothed men came from the capital city, they definitely had something to do with this group of nobles. However, he did not think that all of this was caused by Peter's betrayal, or that Peter was not the only one who betrayed them. That's right, all the clues now pointed to Peter. The work of cleaning up the abandoned information, the gold notes found, and the expensive ice flame volcano all pointed to Peter's problem. However, Tang Yin felt that this seemingly flawless situation was somewhat deliberate. Moreover, the biggest doubt now was this bottle of ice flame volcano. If this was really used by the nobles to buy people's hearts, then why would they keep this obvious evidence when Peter was already poisoned to death? Couldn't they have changed to a cheaper bottle of wine? This seemed to be emphasizing, or rather, directing everyone's attention to the group of nobles. Don't forget that Enoch was once a noble, so it was normal for him to have a bottle of good wine. Moreover, such a watertight method vaguely reminded Tang and Abasco. It had to be said that the nobles were very skilled when it came to scheming. After a while, Josiah pursed his lips and said in a deep voice, "Dave, transfer people." Tang raised his eyebrows and looked up. Then he understood and sighed softly. After all, Josiah was the leader of a secret organization. Since all the targets were now pointed to the nobles, and they had lost a high-ranking member like Elder Ba, revenge was inevitable. Okay, I'll go now. On this sleepless night, besides Josiah and the others preparing for a big operation, in another ordinary hotel room in the city, there was an even bigger operation that was secretly planned. The room was sealed and there were no lights. Coupled with the completely blocked curtains, everything was incomparably dark. A person covered in a black robe knocked rhythmically on the door a few times before pushing the door open and entering. With the help of the temporary lighting in the corridor, a vague figure was sitting under the window. He seemed to turn his head and suddenly said, "The atmosphere here isn't bad, right? It's very suitable for bad people like us to do bad things." After taking 2 steps forward, the black-robed person stopped and did not comment on this sentence. Instead, he bowed and said, "Sir, our operation has failed." "Oh, the reason?" His tone was normal, and there was no anger because of the black-robed person's words. There was only curiosity in his words. Not enough strength. The black-robed person was not surprised and said calmly, "The previous person only gave half of the information. That woman is a magician, but the strength of the person called Arthur beside her is even more terrifying. Our people on this side succeeded in ambushing them, but we couldn't kill them. Instead, we were killed by him alone. If we hadn't retreated in time, I'm afraid we would have been completely wiped out." "Arthur, that's the one who has a sharp tongue, right?" Hee. I really couldn't tell that his skills were so good." After a pause, the black figure seemed to be quite distressed and scratched his head. "Forget it. Nothing good is cheap. 1,000 gold coins to buy the identity of a magician and a chance to ambush is already a profit." The black-robed person did not express his opinion on this cheap price. He asked tentatively, "Sir, then you mean act according to the original plan?" "Sigh, originally because we are all nobles and stand on the same side. I wanted to let them go. But now that it's clear that we can't defeat them, we have to wrong them and sacrifice their lives." "Well, it's not wrong. Didn't they always say that they were willing to sacrifice everything for the benefit of this side in front of the main hall?" Hee. "Thank me. Now the opportunity has finally come." "Then who do we attack first?" "Well, I mean our people." "Sir Simpson?" "Don't. That old man is quite interesting. Besides, looking at him, he doesn't have many years left to live. Just take it as accumulating some good karma. Except for him, the rest are fine." Understood." Chapter 432. When a person's position and status changed, the direction of their thinking and decisions would often change as well. This was almost unavoidable because at that level, every decision would no longer involve just one person, but hundreds of people or even tens of thousands of people. Just like Josiah, although most of the clues pointed to the noble negotiation team, if one analyzed it carefully, they would find that there was no conclusive evidence. And even if they knew that it was the other party who did it, they wouldn't be able to find a real culprit. This was something that everyone could see except for Dave and those who wanted revenge. But so what? As long as they knew that the other party was the biggest suspect, as long as they knew that Elderbaugh was dead, this revenge was imperative. The main job of the secret organization was still propaganda and intelligence. But since they could be linked to intelligence, they naturally had some military strength. Of course, compared to the strength of the men in black who ambushed them, the secret organization's strength in Mountain Stream City was still lacking. Josiah's order to transfer people was to transfer people from the neighboring cities. In fact, the main reason why the secret organization was weak was because they were scattered. There were as many branches as there were cities near the 100,000 mountains. As a result, the secret organization's manpower naturally had to be spread out evenly. And even if they transferred people from the nearest city, it would take at least a day for them to come and go. Therefore, on this normal night, even though the secret agency was constantly making moves, they still spent the night peacefully the next morning. Originally, according to the previous negotiation plan, there would be a negotiation at noon today, and the location would not change. But in the current situation, naturally no one would think about this. Just as Josiah and the others were sitting in the solemn room discussing the matter and waiting for everyone to arrive, a person suddenly arrived and completely messed up the situation. You've all seen the information about the noble negotiation team. Other than the nobles whose strength we don't know, the defensive force on the surface is the few hundred cavalrymen. They're a branch of the Royal Guards. Although their strength is average, they can't be underestimated. The key now is that we don't know how many hidden forces they have like the men in black last night. After a pause, Josiah tapped the intelligence paper on the table and looked at the people around him who were either expressionless or excited. He then said, "Of course, we also have an advantage, which is that we have always been in the dark. Therefore, we still have to carry out this revenge operation in secret. We will retreat after the first strike and try not to leave any clues behind. Tang, you decide the ambush location and plan." "I will lead the deployment." Tang nodded and was about to agree. However, at this moment, a young man walked in through the door. "Captain, there's someone outside the door. He said he knows you and Captain Tang." Josiah and Tang looked at each other with some doubts. The former frowned and asked, "What about the other party's identity?" He only said his name was Philip. Tang opened his mouth and was a little stunned. What was this guy doing here? Tang was not surprised that Philip was able to find this place. After all, Philip had asked him for the address of the secret organization's contact point yesterday. Philip, that noble, he still dared to come? Good, very good. At the side, Dave also thought of this person. He stood up from his chair with a bang. His face was full of anger. He tightly held the sword in his hand that had been wiped 100 times and quickly rushed out of the door. "Dave!" Josiah stretched out his hand to call out, but Dave had already rushed out of the room. He turned a deaf ear and went straight to the front door. Fortunately, at this time, Tang had already fluttered away and followed closely behind. Putting down his arm, Josiah stood up. "Let's go and take a look." This contact point was actually a few private houses. Dave rushed very quickly and arrived at the front courtyard in an instant. Tang naturally could not be left behind by him. When he arrived almost at the same time, he looked up and saw a few unfriendly guards surrounding a young man in a gorgeous robe. Needless to say, that was naturally Philip. At this time, his eyes were covered with a black cloth. His expression was calm, and he did not look uncomfortable as he stood there lazily. Secret organization. Just from the name, it was obvious that it could not be exposed. The black cloth over Philip's eyes was naturally put on by the people at the contact point. "Evil thief, eat my knife, knife, knife." "Captain Tang, don't pull me." After arriving here, Dave did not hesitate to brandish his knife, but his shoulder was caught by Tang in time. Then, no matter how red his face was and how much he brandished the knife in his hand, he could not take a step forward. Sorry, let's wait for Josiah to come first. After arriving here, Tang naturally could not let Dave attack. Although according to Tang Un's inner thoughts, he also wanted to see this flashy guy make a fool of himself. But in any case, they were still friends. This kind of life-risking thing naturally had to be avoided. The movement here was very loud, so Philip naturally heard it. Although he could not see what was going on, he could still hear the sound of the knife cutting through the air. His expression suddenly changed. He no longer looked lazy and hurriedly reached out to take off the black cloth in front of his eyes. At this time, whoosh, the dazzling white shadow spun under the bright sunlight and reflected the blade light towards Philip. It was because Dave, who was both anxious and angry, had been frozen in place and had thrown the knife away. Don't. Ah. A series of exclamations came from Josiah and the others who had just arrived. But because the distance was too far, and Tang In and Dave were between them, it was too late to use magic to save them. Dave's strength was not high, but at such a close distance, there was naturally no possibility of him throwing the knife. In fact, the path of the rotating knife was aimed at Philip's head. Tang In was slightly stunned. He moved his feet to catch the rotating knife. There was no need to talk about his speed. No matter how short the distance was, he had the ability to reach it in an instant. However, after taking a few steps, his body paused, and Tang In suddenly stopped again, his eyes flashing slightly. It was not that he did not want to save him, but that Philip suddenly screamed. His body lowered, and he rolled behind the guard beside him, avoiding the rotating knife. Thud! With a muffled sound, the knife was nailed to the half-closed wooden door behind. Phew! Josiah and the others behind him breathed a sigh of relief. They did not delay and quickly surrounded Dave. Tang In put away his pensive expression and his lips slightly curled up. He stepped forward and pulled Philip up, taking off the black cloth. Gulp! Philip's first reaction was to turn his head, but when he saw the sharp knife, his throat moved and he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. His face was full of lingering fear. Patting the dust off Philip's body, Tang In chuckled and said, Your reaction is not bad. I didn't expect you to have such skills. Philip looked a little surprised. He looked at Tang In and helplessly spread his hands. It's nothing. This kind of scene is very common for me. Especially when I'm caught having an affair. Tang In laughed it off and did not say anything else. When people encounter danger, the body's reaction would always exceed the mind's. Before Philip rolled, there was clearly an aura rising from his body, but it was concealed in an instant. Although Tang In could not see the depth of Philip's strength, he knew that he was definitely not as weak as he looked. Of course, everyone had their own secrets. Philip was not an enemy, so Tang In did not have the time to pry into it. After this chaos, Josiah led Philip to the back room. Although Dave and the others were still angry, they did not have the intention to attack immediately. However, when Philip, who had just recovered from the shock, took a sip of tea and said the first sentence, the room suddenly exploded. All right, were you the ones who did it last night? The room suddenly became quiet, and everyone looked at each other. Immediately, Dave was the first to jump up and point at Philip's nose. Damn you. So you knew about this. Speak. Were you the one who did it? Shameless. What do you mean we did it? It was obviously you who ambushed the captain and the others last night, causing Elderbah to die. Where's my knife? Where's my knife? See if I can't chop this audacious thief to death. Philip froze in his action of holding the teacup, blinked, and stared blankly at the constantly changing faces of anger in front of him. Asterisk bang. Asterisk, all of you be quiet. Amidst the loud noise, Josiah suddenly slammed the table and stood up, his slightly sharp and angry roar instantly drowning out the noise in the room. He then scanned the quiet surroundings and finally looked at Philip, his face slightly gloomy. You know about what happened last night? Just like Tang In's impression, Although Philip was a bit of a playboy and not very reliable when he did things, it was undeniable that he had a unique temperament that made people want to be friends with him. Although Josiah had repeatedly rejected Philip's love, at least he had acknowledged him as a friend. This was also the reason why he did not chase Philip away, even though he knew that a battle with the noble negotiation team was imminent. However, if Philip knew about what happened last night, then everything would be different. The ambush happened very suddenly and ended very quickly. The only people who knew about it could only be them and the perpetrator. "I know," Philip answered rather confusedly, and then he saw Josiah's face turn even uglier. He immediately realized that he had said something wrong and hurriedly raised his hands. Wait. My mind is a bit messy. Let me sort it out first." Quickly knocking on his forehead, Philip looked at the surrounding people who were full of fierce expressions and carefully probed. "You just said, well, you were ambushed last night?" "That's right." Josiah nodded coldly. Dave fiercely added, "Elder Ba also died in this ambush." "You think it was us who did it?" "Elder Ba, only one person died?" "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean that." Looking at the surrounding people who were about to go berserk again, Philip quickly apologized and said the following words. "Last night, in the early hours of the morning, there was also an ambush in the tavern where we stayed. 5 people died. Yes, 3 of them were nobles." After a pause, he spread out his hands. "We thought it was you who did it." Chapter 4:33. A high-class hotel in the center of Mountain Stream City. As the place where the aristocratic negotiators from the northern cities were staying, this hotel, which was originally the highest-class hotel in Mountain Stream City, had risen in status. Not to mention anything else. Other than the city lord's mansion, have you seen any other place in the city where nobles, rich merchants, and famous people come to visit? Today, the hotel welcomed another group of guests. Of course, they were uninvited guests. Normally, no one would want to see them, the guards. However, the owner of the hotel, an old man in black with a ruddy complexion, was very respectful to these uninvited guests. He looked as if he couldn't wait to pull them in. "Thank you for your hard work, sirs. Please come in. May I ask where Director Bose is?" The director went to the neighboring city to investigate a case. "Oh." The old man in black looked disappointed. He didn't give up and asked again, "Where is Chief Bugnes?" He went with the director. Didn't you report that someone died here?" The old man didn't have time to hide his disappointed expression. He hurriedly interrupted the captain. He looked around and hurriedly led everyone into the hotel. Only then did he let out a long sigh of relief. He then pointed behind him and said with an ugly expression, "Forgive me, sirs. The identity of the person who died this time is very sensitive. Someone inside told us not to spread the news, so..." The captain scratched his head. Then, as if he thought of something, his expression changed. He took a deep breath and said hesitantly, "I remember that a group of aristocrats came from the capital a few days ago. They stayed here, right? Could it be?" It can't be. I also want to say no." The old man in black looked very bitter. The wrinkles on his face almost merged together. As long as the aristocrats died unnaturally, it was not a small matter. Moreover, the aristocrats this time came from the capital. No matter how this matter ended, his hotel would be branded with an ominous name. This would be a disastrous blow to a high-end hotel like his that catered to nobles and wealthy merchants. This was also the reason why he was so anxious to ask if Bose and Bugnes were around. As long as this matter could be resolved as soon as possible, his hotel might still have some hope. However, since Bose and the others weren't here, the black-clothed old man could only place his hopes on these cavalrymen. He pulled the captain a few steps to the side and saluted. "Sir, this time we're relying on you. Furthermore, this matter cannot be spread out for the time being. Please ask your brothers to keep it secret." At this point, the black-clothed old man's sleeve touched the captain's palm. He lowered his voice and said, "This is just a small token of appreciation. Just treat it as treating my lord and my brothers to a drink." The cavalry captain's arm trembled as he blinked his eyes with a strange expression on his face. Then he pulled his hand out from under his sleeve, and a folded 100 gold note entered his sight. In order to solve this case as soon as possible, the black-clothed old man was willing to spend gold notes on a mere cavalry captain. However, the cavalry captain's reaction was even more strange. His body twisted unnaturally a few times before he stuffed the gold note back into the black-clothed old man's hand, as if he was throwing away a hot potato. Cough, cough. Don't worry. We'll do our best to complete this matter. The black-clothed old man looked at the captain in astonishment. Then he suddenly smiled and folded his sleeve again. Sir, I'll have to trouble you with this matter. This time, he stuffed 2 gold notes into the captain's hand. Clearly, the black-clothed old man thought that the other party thought it was too little. The corner of the captain's mouth twitched as if he was about to collapse. He hurriedly retreated and waved his hand. That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. Sigh. We'll definitely do our best to complete this matter. Don't give it to me. I beg you, please don't give it to me. The drama that was going on here was a bit funny. The black-clothed old man thought that the captain thought it was too little or wanted to take the opportunity to raise the price. However, no matter what it was, he didn't have a choice. Therefore, he kept increasing the number of gold notes. The cavalry captain kept retreating with small steps. His hands were placed in front of his chest and moved at an extremely high frequency. It seemed that he really didn't want the money in front of him, but he was also worried about being seen by others. His appearance was very embarrassing. After a short while, sweat had already climbed up his forehead. Just as this side was in a deadlock due to the lack of communication, a muscular man with long hair that covered his left eye walked up from behind. Cough, cough. Captain, aren't you going to take a look at the scene? Yes. Oh, yes, yes. Enter the scene, enter the scene. The cavalry captain let out a sigh of relief. He took large strides back and took the opportunity to get rid of the black-clothed old man who was constantly pestering him. He then waved his hand behind him. Brothers, let's go. We'll go in and take a look. The black-clothed old man held 5 or 6 gold notes and stood to the side in a daze. He was at a loss. He didn't believe that there was a cat in this world that didn't steal fish. If the captain didn't take it, it would only make him think even more negatively. Could it be that he took money from my competitors and now wants to join forces to rob my hotel? No, it seems that I have to increase the price. I don't believe that I can't settle this. Just as the black-clothed old man hardened his heart and chased after the cavalry captain with the intention of being ripped off, 2 people suddenly came in from the entrance of the hotel. One of them was a young man wearing a gorgeous robe. He glanced at the black-clothed old man and waved his hand. Owner, this way. His voice was very loud. The cavalrymen who were about to leave the hotel all subconsciously turned their heads to take a look. Then, they disappeared from the back door of the hotel. Sigh. After the black-clothed old man recognized that it was one of the nobles in the backyard, he sighed in his heart. He could only put the matter of the bribery aside for now and turned to walk towards the door. He bowed and saluted. Sir Philip, is there something I can help you with? It's like this. Where is the waiter who first discovered that something was wrong this morning? I want to see him. No problem. He's in the back room. However, the people from the police station are also here. Maybe they also need to ask him some questions. Then let them wait for a while. Okay, please come with me. Of course, the nobles had such privileges. Although the black-clothed old man hoped that the people from the police station would interrogate first and investigate this matter clearly as soon as possible, he could only nod. But now, he could only nod and agree. He waved his hand and led the way. Tang! Oh, now he's called Jack. Jack, let's go. What's wrong? Philip looked at the middle-aged man beside him, who seemed to be deep in thought, and asked doubtfully. Needless to say, this middle-aged man was naturally Tang Yin. After hearing about the appearance of the noble negotiation team at the contact point, Josiah and the others were also a little dumbfounded. They wanted to find the other party for revenge, but the other party was probably also preparing to fight them to the death. This was almost certain. Just like when they first suspected the nobles after being ambushed, The nobles would definitely put the blame on them when they were assassinated. In the end, Josiah and the others did not come to a conclusion. They still decided to let Tang come over to take a look first to see if he could find any clues. Of course, this time Tang would have to disguise himself again. Otherwise, they would probably fight before they could even enter the door. Oh, nothing. Tang quickly withdrew his gaze from the back door of the hall and shrugged. I just saw two acquaintances. I didn't expect to meet them here. Is that so? What a coincidence. Philip was not interested in asking. He casually responded and followed the black-clothed old man to the back. At the back of the hotel, the group of police cavalry pulled a waiter to lead the way. The cavalry captain still walked in the front, but his eyes seemed to be a little erratic. He glanced at the strong cavalry who greeted him before on his left, and then looked at the thin youth on his right with an expressionless face. Slap, what are you looking at? Just as the cavalry captain glanced to the left again, the burly cavalryman suddenly stepped forward and patted his shoulder. Hall. Nothing. The captain bent his back slightly and stammered as he replied. The imposing manner of the leader instantly disappeared. The strong cavalry continued to say casually, Just now, that old man gave you money, right? How much? No. Hearing this, the captain's body instantly trembled. His expression changed dramatically, and he hurriedly waved his hand. I didn't take it. Not a single cent, really. You didn't take it? The strong cavalry's right eye widened, and his face was full of astonishment. He nodded desperately. Yes, I dare to swear. How could I take? Before he finished speaking, slap. The back of the captain's head was slapped. The strong cavalry grimaced and was very angry. Damn it. Why didn't you take the money that was sent to your door? Tell me how much? There seems to be 600 or 700 gold coins. The captain was confused and answered subconsciously in a daze. F***CK. So much gold coins, and your F***king pushing it away? You have no future in this life. The man's tone was full of disappointment. What about me? Why do I have such an unenlightened subordinate like you? Phew, I'm so angry. Right? Later that old man will definitely come to you. Remember to be smart. If he can pay 700, he can definitely pay 1,000. If this matter is messed up, see if I don't beat you up. Yes. The captain seemed to have just woken up from a dream and kept nodding like a chick pecking rice. That's enough, old bow. The thin young man on the side shook his head and pulled back the strong cavalry who was about to instruct on the bidding technique. Let's get down to business first. This is also a F***king business. The strong cavalry grimaced as if he had a toothache. It's not like you don't know that now the police station is so poor that they almost rob people. We still haven't paid the smuggler for the purchase of the crossbows. Damn it, the reputation of the police station chief is worth some money. Otherwise, I would be chased and chopped up by debt collectors when I go out. The police station chief. That's right. The two people who were talking were Bose and Bugnes in the same disguise. Since they returned from outside the city, they had been lurking in the city and secretly investigating the identity and movements of the group of men in black. Stop complaining. Be careful not to be exposed. Looking at the waiter in front of him, who looked back with a puzzled expression, Bugnes pulled down his helmet and whispered, Right, I forgot to ask you. How are you so sure that what happened in this hotel has something to do with the men in black? Feeling. F***CK. Hee, I'm just kidding. Don't get too worked up. Think about it. The men in black are not weak, but we have never heard of them before. Also, the past few months were peaceful, which roughly means that they just arrived here not long ago. Hee, think about it again. What kind of person or thing is worthy of their attention recently? It must be this group of boring nobles. That sounds reasonable. Then what about last night's incident? We picked up a lot of bodies, and we can confirm that they are the men in black. There are too many reasons for that. If you walk too much at night, you will eventually encounter demons. TSK. You don't say. The wounds on those bodies were really beautiful. That angle, that strength, that timing. Just thinking about it makes my sword tremble uncontrollably. I really didn't expect Mountain Stream City to have a mole of this level. I wish I could meet him sooner. Tisk, how do you know it's a mole? Of course, feeling, of course, do you understand? Sigh, forget it, a blockhead like you won't have this kind of wonderful feeling. Is that so? My reason tells me that if you really meet that mole, you will most likely die. Bah! Chapter 434. How is it? Did you find any clues? The 5 people who died last night were not moved away. Instead, their bodies were placed side by side in a large room at the back of the hotel. 3 nobles and 2 officials who were responsible for recording the negotiations. Among them, the 2 recording officials were fine. Although they had some status, they certainly could not be compared to the 3 nobles. Regardless of the impact, even if they were dead, they would still be dead. The 2 recording officials were most likely going to be buried here, but the bodies of these nobles would soon be put into luxurious coffins and then transported back to the capital at the fastest speed to be buried in their respective family tombs. I'm not Conan. What? Oh, nothing. Other than being sure that the assassin was cruel enough, I didn't find anything else. After murmuring, Tang looked at the wounds on the 5 corpses, which were the fatal slashes on the necks, and simply shook his head. Philip also pinched the bridge of his nose and said with some distress, I can't think of a motive. There was no sound last night, and now there are no clues. You saw the waiter just now, so you know that these people's rooms are together. I now feel that the assassin didn't have a target at all. He just took out a knife in the middle of the night and then randomly chose a few rooms. While the people inside were asleep, he went in and simply beheaded them. TSK, TSK. Nodding in agreement, Tang actually had the same feeling in his heart. Then he muttered to himself, the method of these people, is somewhat similar to the black-clothed men who ambushed us last night. Philip was stunned. Do you mean this is a group of people? They went to ambush you first, and then came here to kill these people? There's no conflict in time, is there? Tang took one last look at the fierce slash on the neck of the corpses, and then thought about the situation when he fought with the black-clothed men last night. He nodded and reached out to lift the white cloth. Then this matter is complicated. Philip scratched his head and pointed to the body on the far right. I know what you're thinking. Actually, Sir Ronald and the rest had similar thoughts in their minds. But this man was firmly on the side of the traditional nobles. Now he's been killed. This morning, Simpson almost got into a fight with Ronald because of this. It doesn't look fake. That was the truth. After both the secret organization and the nobles were attacked, apart from suspecting each other, they turned their attention to Simpson and the other traditional nobles with impure motives. But now, one of the dead people was a traditional noble, which was a little confusing. This was a real noble, so there was no possibility of him using self-injury to gain the enemy's confidence. Actually, it's not that complicated. Tangen was about to say something when the black-clothed old man, who was also the owner of the inn, came in with a troubled expression. He bowed and said, Sir Philip, the guards are here to check these bodies. Tangen stopped Philip's intention to send him away. Let's go. There's nothing to see here. Let's talk outside. Outside the door was the long corridor on the 2nd floor. From afar, they could see the group of garrison cavalrymen walking towards them. The 2 sides looked at each other. Tang secretly glanced at the 2 cavalrymen in the group, touched his nose, and walked towards the stairs in the opposite direction. The black-clothed old man did not follow this time. He was standing at the door of the room, waiting for the cavalrymen to arrive. Obviously, in his mind, the garrison cavalrymen were much more important than these 2 so-called nobles. When Tang and Philip disappeared around the corner of the stairs, Bose retracted his gaze and frowned. He pulled the black-clothed old man aside. Who were those 2 people just now? Oh, one is Sir Philip, and the other. Well, he's a little unfamiliar, but judging from his bearing, he should be a noble too. The black-clothed old man did not mind and answered casually. He then bowed to the captain of the cavalrymen. Please, please, the bodies of the nobles who were killed last night are here. Bose rubbed his nose and paused for a moment. Finally, he shrugged and walked into the room. At the stairs, Philip asked as he walked down the stairs, What do you plan to do next? Ha ha, Of course we won't tell a noble like you. Tangin joked and then rubbed his chin. Actually, we're fine here. After all, we're in the dark. Last night, we were ambushed because there was a traitor. On the contrary, you guys are different. Your target is too obvious. I think that group of people will attack you again. That makes sense. Philip raised his eyebrows and nodded in agreement. Tangin's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at him. Huh, you don't seem to be nervous at all? He raised his head and laughed. Ha, I'm just an idle person. Who would attack me? I'm completely worthless. Looking at Tang Un's half-smile, Philip sighed helplessly and spread his hands. Okay. My situation is a little special. As long as the other party is not crazy, they won't attack me. I guessed it. Well, you're not one of the princes of the brand, are you? Huh? Philip opened his mouth, and his face was filled with absurd astonishment. He froze for a moment and covered his forehead. Come on, although that identity is indeed not bad. But His Majesty the King is almost 90 years old. Even the youngest prince is a middle-aged uncle. How could it be my turn? You should have said so earlier. I was thinking if I kidnapped you, the negotiation would be smoother. Philip grinned and was speechless. Just then, a burst of loud laughter suddenly sounded from outside, following which, Ares, whom Tang had met a few times before, strode in with a few bloodied prey in his hands. Behind him were still the same 2 bodyguards and housekeepers, one strong and one thin. Oh, it's Philip, and this is... After entering, Ares was about to turn to the right corridor. However, when he raised his head and saw the 2 people on the stairs, he greeted them with some doubt. Philip extended his hand and introduced them. Oh, this is Viscount Jack. He's a friend I made when I came to the north. Well, Jack, this is Count Ares. It's an honor to meet you, Sir Ares. Tang Yin greeted him in accordance with aristocratic etiquette. Oh, it's an honor, an honor. Ares nodded casually and waved the prey in his hands. Well, since you can become friends with this kid, Philip, you're not an ordinary person. It's worth getting to know you. Come, let's go to my room for a drink. How about we roast and eat these beasts while we're at it? Tang Yin was a little stunned. This guy was too familiar with him. Beside him, Philip took a step forward and shook his head. Next time, we're going out to take care of something. After saying that, he pointed to the prey and deftly changed the topic. Did you just hunt these? Haha, not bad. Ares did not care about being rejected. He smiled and waved the prey in his hands. That Viscount in the city insisted on inviting me to the hunting ground. This is my harvest after half a day. How about it? Not bad, right? Huh, what a fine specimen. Tangin's eyes flashed, and he rubbed his nose. Although the people here had just died, it did not affect his interest in going out to hunt. After exchanging a few simple words, Ares' expression became somewhat impatient. Soon, he waved goodbye with his 2 followers and turned into the right corridor on the first floor. It seemed that he was indeed impatient to roast the prey. After Tang Yin bowed and sent the other party away, he turned his head and said with a smile, "This Ares is quite interesting." Philip nodded. Yes, don't look at his low rank. In the capital city, he can be considered a character. Well, speaking of his origin is quite interesting. Probably seeing that Tang Yin was a little curious about Ares, Philip said while walking down the stairs. His family is a marquis. However, the head of the family was really unlucky. He had raised many wives and lovers throughout his life, but he did not have a single child. It seemed that the family was about to die out. However, when he happened to inspect a farm, he found a young man named Ares who looked exactly like him when he was young. After asking around, he found out that the mother of this young man was actually his maid. You know, a maid is basically the bed partner of an aristocrat's son. Even if she later became old, or if she made some mistake and was driven out of the family castle, she could not marry again. After the head of the marquis family investigated and confirmed that Ares was his son, he was ecstatic. He immediately brought him to the castle and asked the king for the title of count as quickly as possible. Well, of course, it was good to enter the upper class. However, Ares was already an adult at that time. He could not adapt to some of the aristocratic habits at all. He wanted to learn, but he was slow. However, he also had his own stubborn temperament. He simply showed a reckless image to others. If you dare to laugh at me, I will scold you. If I can't scold you, I will use my fist. If I can't beat you, I will fight you the next time we meet. Over time, he became an anomaly in the capital city's aristocratic circle. He neither formed cliques nor joined other groups, although those aristocrats continued to laugh at him secretly. In the end, they did not dare to provoke him in front of his face. Hearing this, Tang In could not help but smack his lips and sigh. TSK, he really is a character. It was not difficult to be an anomaly for a day, but it was difficult to be an anomaly for a lifetime. Moreover, it was difficult to be an anomaly for a lifetime. That's right, Philip also agreed, then shrugged. This time, he is here to supervise the family business. However, because it involves the mine in the 100,000 mountains, he can only wait here for the negotiation to end. Tang In nodded and did not care much. Since the situation had been confirmed, the next step was naturally to go out and discuss with Josiah and the others. Of course, the revenge that they had planned at the beginning could not be carried out. This did not mean that they no longer doubted these aristocrats, but they simply did not want to be used by others. When they were about to leave the hotel, Tang In slapped his forehead, turned around, and said, "By the way, I need you to run an errand for Sir Ronald." "Well, there's no need to make them believe you. Just tell them that we were ambushed last night." "Understood." Philip nodded to indicate that he understood. Then, as if he had thought of something, he rubbed his palms. "Hee about Joseph? He hasn't given up yet? Huh, how's that possible?" Tang In spread his hands indifferently. "Okay, I'll keep an eye on him for you." No, you don't understand what I mean." Philip waved his hand, then straightened his face and said solemnly, "I just hope that you won't embezzle what you are guarding." Chapter 435. There were no secrets in the circle of nobles. The assassination of the noble negotiation team could not be covered up, but due to the efforts of Ronald and the other new nobles, this matter was only quietly spread within the noble circle of Mountain Stream City and did not spread widely. As for Simpson and the others, although they could not blatantly disrupt the negotiation, they would definitely spread the news to the capital. Of course, in their story, the most suspicious culprits were naturally the Gray Coat Army. However, these were all minor details. The most important thing was still the two parties involved in the negotiation. First of all, the original plan of once-a-day negotiation would definitely fail. Although the secret organization had given up on revenge, Peter's betrayal still shocked Josiah and the others too much. After receiving Tang On's suggestion, Josiah simply made some adjustments to the organization. The revamped secret organization was completely in accordance with the standards of the intelligence department. The skeleton of the organization was the 10 people that Tang En had previously trained. According to Tang En's plan, the organization would be more secretive and professional than before, whether in terms of external locations or internal communications. Of course, the authority would also be more centralized. However, although it was only a partial adjustment, the scale of the secret organization was not small now. Naturally, the effect could not be seen immediately. However, as long as there was a direction, with Josiah's ability, it would not be a problem to run an efficient and professional organization. At the same time, Ronald's new group of nobles was also entangled with many trivial matters. After all, nobles had died, and they had come together. Although this matter was temporarily suppressed, the undercurrent surging within could not be underestimated. If it was not handled well, it would be a fuse that could be ignited easily. Moreover, they also had to deal with the endless criticism from the traditional nobles, which was even more of a headache. However, even so, Josiah's side did not break off contact with the new nobles because of this. After Philip mediated, the two sides once again established a preliminary trust. However, on the third day after this incident, the hotel where the noble negotiation team was staying was assassinated again. In the morning, at the secret organization's contact point, Philip, Josiah, Tang In, and the others who had rushed over gathered in the meeting room. Because of the shocking news that Philip brought, The room went through quite a bit of chaos. After the discussion stopped, Tang Yin frowned and asked, "How many people died this time?" "3." Philip shook his head with a wretched expression. "This time, they are all on the side of the new nobles. 2 of them are administrative assistants for this negotiation, and 1 of them is a noble. Alas, that noble lives right across from me. He even said good night to me before he went to bed. Are the people from the police station here? What did you find?" Now, Tang Yin already knew that Bose had begun to pay attention to this matter. As the saying goes, every profession has its own specialization. Solving cases and arresting people naturally depended on these professionals. He came early in the morning, but what can he find? Philip laughed bitterly and spread his hands. It's still the same clean method. He chopped off his head while he was asleep. He didn't struggle at all. Naturally, he wouldn't leave any clues. Tang and nodded silently and then fell into deep thought. It's good that he died. How satisfying, Dave. Josiah glared at the muttering Dave and bowed his head apologetically. Philip shrugged his shoulders and didn't mind. Of course, this was only because he didn't care about the new nobles at all. If Ronald and the others were sitting here and heard Dave's words, chaos would be unavoidable. It seems that the negotiation can't continue. Josiah frowned and shook his head slightly. He asked, "What do you plan to do now?" Philip spread his hands honestly. "I don't know. When I first came out, the hotel was in a mess. Some said they wanted to change places, and some said they wanted to go back. Alas, actually, after the assassination attempt last time, the hotel has been heavily guarded. But now, the enemy has easily succeeded. Now, everyone is worried that they will be the next target. This outcome was inevitable. Under such circumstances, not to mention the nobles who cherished their lives, even if it were anyone else, they would still avoid it." Twain, who had been silent for a while, suddenly asked, "Do the new nobles have anything important for this negotiation?" "Something important?" Philip was stunned and scratched his head. "I think there is something like that." "Oh, right. Sir Ronald has a seal." "Yes, it's more important." "Oh." Tang Yin nodded thoughtfully and didn't say anything else. Joja, on the other hand, was taken aback because she saw Tang Yin secretly give her a look. Then he looked at Enoch, Dave, and the others and lowered his eyes. After thinking for a while, Josiah understood. He returned to his normal expression and continued to chat with Philip. Soon, he got up and sent Philip out. Of course, as Philip's friend, Tang Yin also got up to send him off. When they approached the door of the communication point, Philip consciously picked up a black cloth to cover his eyes and walked into the sealed carriage. Tang Yin didn't say anything. He just waved his hand and replaced the coachman's position. Although Josiah didn't understand, he still sat together with Tang Yin. Tang Yin looked at Josiah and didn't refuse. He waved the whip and urged the horse to move forward. After about a few minutes, Tang Yin suddenly turned the carriage into a remote alley and stopped. He then got into the carriage with Josiah. "It's fast this time. This fragrance." In the carriage, Philip was sitting obediently at the side. He first muttered to himself. Then, he opened his mouth in shock and sniffed in the direction where Josiah was sitting. He quickly reached out and took off the black cloth in front of his eyes. TSK, you have a good nose." After looking at Josiah, who was blushing, Tang Yin turned his head and smacked his lips. His face was full of disdain and admiration. "Haha, it's okay. Philip put down the black cloth awkwardly. Then, as if he thought of something, his body suddenly shrank back and his face was full of horror. "Damn, Tang, you're not really going to kidnap me, are you? I'm really not a prince." "Uh-huh." Seeing this, Josiah was stunned at first. Then, he couldn't help but cover his mouth and chuckle. The corner of his mouth twitched. Tang Yin said expressionlessly, "Don't worry. Even if you are a prince, I won't kidnap you. That's good. I'm mainly worried that your father will put righteousness before family." "Okay, no more jokes." Tang Yin waved his hand and looked serious. "Is that seal really important to the negotiation?" "Oh, if it's difficult, you don't have to say it in detail." "Actually, it's not that." After a pause, Philip rolled his eyes and suddenly straightened his body. He waved his arm grandly. Look at what you're saying. Even if the seal is important, so what? If I don't give you face, how can I not give face to Josiah? Get to the point. Tang Yin strengthened his tone and continued to be expressionless. So unkind. You only know how to embezzle. Muttering softly, Philip glared at Tang Yin angrily. Then, he leaned against the wall of the carriage and said listlessly, "Do you still remember what I told you earlier? On the surface, this negotiation looks like a fight between the new nobles and the traditional nobles. But in fact, it really involves the struggle for imperial power between the two princes of the Bran Empire. Sir Ronald and the others were only pushed out to carry out the mission. If there is a result from the negotiation, he will send the result back to the capital and let the second prince make the decision. Of course, the letter must have the second prince's personal seal on it. So, the seal in Sir Ronald's hand is the second prince's personal seal?" Josiah concluded. Philip nodded. "That's right." Tang Yin rubbed his chin. "Seems like it's quite important. Does Simpson and the others know about this?" "They should be able to guess, but they might not know about the seal." Philip thought about it and gave the answer. "That's the effect I want." Tang Yin clapped and laughed. Then he said to Philip, "I need you to get the seal." "Yes, it's best if you do it in public." "Oh, why?" Tang Yin narrowed his long and narrow eyes. "Because I think the so-called murderer is right beside you, or someone who knows you very well. His purpose should be to sabotage the negotiation." Philip was stunned and asked doubtfully, "Wait a minute, I believe you when you say that the other party is trying to sabotage the negotiation. After all, the people he killed are indeed from the negotiation team. But why do you think he's right beside us?" "Very simple, because you're not dead." Tang Yin spread his hands and calmly analyzed. "Last night, the other party killed his way to the door opposite yours. Why didn't he enter your room? Don't forget, last time he killed 5 people, but this time he only killed 3. I don't believe that you're so lucky. The biggest possibility is that the other party knows your identity. TSK, TSK. Didn't you say that as long as the other party isn't crazy, they won't dare to kill you? Obviously, the other party isn't crazy." Smack! Philip was stunned for a moment. Then he suddenly hammered his palm. "That makes sense. That makes sense. F*CK. It seems like the problem lies with those traditional nobles. They're really F*King crazy. In order to divert attention, they even killed their own people. I don't care if he's crazy or not. I only know that if the seal is with you, the other party will definitely come looking for you. Good idea. Set a trap and wait for them to come." "Oh, wait." Philip's excited expression suddenly froze. He blinked a few times and pointed at himself. His expression changed drastically. You want to use me as bait?" "Yes. Is there a problem?" Tang Yin spread his hands and looked certain. "I've already thought about it. As long as your identity is awesome enough, they will at most knock you out. They won't dare to kill you. Help me thank your whole family. F*CK. You're asking me to do this kind of thing? Are you kidding me? No, definitely not." Philip kept waving his hands, and his body shrank into the car. He looked like he was about to break the car and escape. "Don't worry, I'll go with you. You just need to sleep and leave the rest to me." "Oh, that won't do. I knew it would be like this." Speechlessly shaking his head, Tang Yin got up and patted Josiah's shoulder with an expression that said, "I'm counting on you." Josiah pursed his lips and chuckled. He nodded and opened the car door to let Tang Yin out first. Why are you looking at me like that? Let me tell you, although I like you, when it comes to my life, the beauty trap is useless against me." "Well, it's completely useless." "Wow, your eyes are so beautiful. The stars in the sky are just like that." "Cough, cough. That. Can you stop looking at me? You're making me panic. I'm a pile of dog shit. Please don't look at me." Chapter 436. In the afternoon, in a high-class hotel in the city, everyone was in a state of panic. Even though it was broad daylight, the nobles still chose to gather in the front hall. Although they were terrified of the first assassination, they still thought it was a fluke and thought it was just a coincidence. However, the second assassination had undoubtedly caused their inner defenses to crumble. Now, Only in a crowded place like this could they feel more secure. Damn it, we can't stay here anymore. Let's change to a safer place. Idiot, can't you see? Those damn bastards are coming for us. Many people have been transferred here these few days. The security here is even tighter than the nobles' manors. It's useless to change anywhere. Then what do you think we should do? Are we just going to wait for death here? We might as well go back. Let's see what Sir Ronald has to say. Don't say things out of anger. We came here with a mission. Before we get a clear result, there's no way out. He shook his head. So, other than praying to the god of light, there's no other way. F***CK. Similar complaints and helpless conversations filled the entire hall. In a situation where their lives were threatened, the nobles' usual demeanor was basically abandoned. Moreover, the new nobles had a mission and couldn't leave this dangerous place. As for the traditional nobles, they were naturally the same. They were even more passive. After all, they came here with a mission to supervise. As long as Sir Ronald didn't leave, they couldn't leave. Everyone understood the current situation, but they had no choice but to wait like this. At this moment, there was a burst of cheerful laughter from outside the door. There was a faint female voice, which seriously conflicted with the atmosphere here. All the nobles subconsciously shifted their displeased gazes over. What kind of person was this at a time like this? Oh, there were sighs of understanding. Damn it, this womanizer has so much free time. He's still in a mood to look for women? Really? He'll die on a woman's stomach sooner or later. That's true, but only he dares to do this now. Sigh, I understand now. There's nothing better than having a good father and a good grandfather. First, there was strong condemnation, then envy, and finally, they shook their heads speechlessly. In a short period of time, the mood of the nobles changed several times. Finally, they quieted down, the corners of their mouths twitching as they looked at the two people who came in and greeted them. Oh, everyone's here. Good afternoon, good afternoon. How's it going? Did the guards find anything useful? Oh, I forgot to introduce, this is my friend, Miss Loris. Don't be fooled by her young age. She's the leader of a merchant group. If you guys have any business, please take care of me, huh? A man and a woman. The man was naturally Philip, and as for the woman, well, that was not important. What was important was that she was indeed beautiful. Even though the nobles were worried about their lives being threatened and had no other thoughts, they still had to admit that she was indeed of very eye-catching beauty. She wore a beautiful outfit, behaved appropriately, and had a bright and confident smile. She was a woman with a strong presence. Even if she was in a noble gathering, she would naturally become the focus of attention. Combined with what Philip had said about the leader of the merchant group, it was easy to explain the origin of this temperament. Well, another fresh flower that was about to enter the wolf's mouth, the nobles sighed slightly, but it disappeared in a flash. They really did not have the mood to do that now. After expressionlessly responding to Philip's greeting, they shook their heads helplessly and simply decided not to see, not to worry about. Probably knowing the current situation of the crowd, Philip gave a simple greeting and led the woman to the attic at the back. Just as they entered the corridor, Philip instantly let go of the hand that was gently placed on the woman's waist. His body pressed against the wall as he bent over and gasped for breath, his right hand continuously waving. Huff! Huff! I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. The beautiful woman glanced over, the corners of her mouth curling into a radiant arc. Darling, what's wrong with you? Wah! Retching, Philip retreated pathetically, avoiding the woman's outstretched hand as if he had seen a ghost. Please, stop playing. The stimulation is too great. I can't take it all. Huffed. Someone like you dares to call yourself the capital's flower wolf? The woman sneered, her face full of disdain. Then, she raised her eyebrows and chuckled as she tucked a strand of hair in front of her forehead behind her ear. Well, what did Josiah say to you before that made you agree? He said, Huffed. Don't even think about it. Hearing this, Philip quickly shook his head and crossed his arms in front of his chest, his face solemn, as if he was determined to defend his dignity. Huffed. Even if you don't say, I have my ways to find out. The woman rolled her eyes and curled her lips in a way that damaged her image. However, The words that she spoke this time were no longer the pleasant female voice from before. Ah, phew. Philip simply sat down on the carpet in the corridor and patted his chest, looking as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Damn, it still sounds so easy. Just now, all my hairs were standing on end. Tang in. Do we really need to use this method to enter? Tang in. That's right. This beautiful woman was Tang in. This level of disguise was not difficult for the current Tang in. Even dwarfs and children could do it, so it was naturally easier for a woman. As for the acting skills of speech and temperament, Tang in was even better at it. Therefore, as long as he did not care about some illusory face and dignity, everything could be done naturally. It's not impossible to sneak in, although the security here is tight now. This method is the most convenient for my actions to the greatest extent. I can't always hide in your room and not come out, right? Besides, after a simple explanation, Tang in looked at Philip on the ground and curled his lips. This method is the most suitable for your style of doing things, and it's also the easiest way for the nobles to accept. Philip opened his mouth, but he was speechless. This was indeed the case. With his style, bringing back a woman was the most normal thing to do. On the contrary, bringing back a man was not normal at all. This could be seen from the behavior of the nobles just now. All right, let's go back to the room first. These 2 water bags are for me. Oh, darling, what are you doing? The floor is so cold. Get up quickly. After holding the twin peaks on his chest, Tang Un's expression suddenly changed. He once again revealed a bright smile and reached out to hold Philip's shoulder. Again, cough, cough. Philip felt a chill run down his spine. After he felt the pain on his shoulder, he quivered and grinned. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, and he said with a smile and a cry, "Hee hee, as you can see, I don't fall down often. I usually only fall for beauty." He, secretly praising, Tang in covered his mouth and chuckled at the right time. At the door of the house, not far from the 2 of them, Ares was looking at them in a daze. Behind him, 2 butler guards were carrying bags of various sizes, looking like they were about to go out. After getting up, Philip looked as if he had just seen Ares. He spread out his hands. "Hey, it's Sir Ares. What are you doing?" After smacking his lips, Ares returned to his normal expression and walked over with a big laugh. "Haha, I was wondering why I couldn't find you these 2 days. You actually found yourself a beauty without telling me. That's really, not kind at all. You didn't even bring me along." After pausing for a moment, he revealed an expression of, you know what I mean, that was unique to men. Noticing the gazes of the 2 of them, he turned his head to look at his subordinates who were carrying the bags and scratched his head. "You know, the recent situation has been a little bad. Although I'm not afraid. Haha, I'm a little afraid. However, this has nothing to do with me, so I naturally have to run away first." Understanding, Philip nodded his head. This was the truth. Naturally, he would not show any contempt towards the other party. After exchanging a few pleasantries, he introduced Tang in and Ares to each other. After hearing Tang On's identity, Ares appeared rather surprised. He winked and praised Philip's foresight while chatting with Tang in about his business knowledge. Since Tang and had assumed this identity, he naturally wouldn't be careless about the relevant preparations. He revealed a reserved and joyful expression of someone who was in a position of power, following which he cleverly picked up the topic of Ares. Later on, the scene became somewhat lively. Ares seemed to have the intention of immediately starting a business cooperation. Of course, the current time and place weren't right. Ares had no choice but to temporarily dispel this idea. After chatting for a while, he left with his 2 companions, one strong and one thin. After this episode, Tang in and Ares didn't delay any longer and quickly returned to Philip's room on the 2nd floor. Phew! Just as the door closed, Philip immediately reclined on the chair and breathed a sigh of relief. "I didn't get exposed just now, right?" Tang in observed the surroundings of the room and casually said, "No." However, some of his words seemed to be probing. "That's good. It's fine. You just like that." Philip waved his hand carelessly and then asked, "When are we going to get the seal?" Tang in carefully checked the doors and windows. "There's no hurry. Let's look at the timing. The key is to be natural. We can't let the other party become suspicious. Understood. Philip nodded to show that he understood and then curled his lips. Ronald's side is simple. With such a hot potato in his hands, that old man must be unable to sleep well now and can't wait for someone to take over. That's why we still have time. That's true. Philip rubbed his chin and thought for a while before asking. But then again, will the other party believe us if we do this? After setting down a few small warning devices, Tang In stood up and smiled. To be able to successfully assassinate him twice, the other party is obviously not stupid. Naturally, they won't believe us so easily. It still depends on our acting skills. As long as there's no problem on our side, the other party will test us even if they suspect us. And this will be our chance. Well, you're the expert in this area. I'll listen to you. Philip spread his hands. So what do we do now? Rest for a while, and then accompany me to go shopping. Shopping. Nonsense. Isn't this how you pick up girls? Remember, we're professionals. Why do I feel like I brought this upon myself? Chapter 437. Under the circumstances where it was impossible to evacuate Mountain Stream City, the noble negotiation team did not change out of this somewhat ominous high-class hotel. Of course, the security was strengthened by quite a bit. Not to mention the status of these nobles. Just their titles alone were enough to completely destroy the situation where a viscount in the north could dominate a town. Therefore, the garrison cavalry that received orders had already pulled up layers of defense outside the hotel, to the point where even birds would find it difficult to enter. However, even so, the uneasiness in the hearts of the nobles was still increasing. At this point, they actually had some idea of what was going on. The target of suspicion had changed from the Gray Coat Army to the enemy nobles. The traditional nobles and the new nobles were like fire and water. Out of demeanor and whatnot, they could live in harmony on the surface, but there was no lack of backstabbing. Now that there were casualties on both sides, in their hearts, it could be said that they had shed all pretense of cordiality. Naturally, they were more careful. It should not be forgotten that although the hotel was heavily guarded, that was relative to outsiders. If the nobles inside wanted to play some tricks, such as bringing some people in, it would not be difficult. It was because of this that the nobles became more and more uneasy. Fortunately, the day of the second assassination slowly passed while they were on tenterhooks the next morning. Under Philip's lead, Tang In once again entered the hotel from the outside. At first, in order to leave a strong impression on the nobles that this is Philip's girl, Tang In disguised himself as a woman. Whether in terms of dress or in terms of his temperament, he showed a strong sense of presence. This kind of woman, who was similar to a strong career woman, would naturally not be taken down so easily. Therefore, apart from shopping yesterday, Tang In did not spend the night at Philip's place. Of course, this was also why Tang In was confident that the murderer would not act immediately. Sure enough, after meeting, Philip whispered that there was nothing unusual last night. Tang In nodded, then looked at the tight security around them and said casually, "Oh right, Josiah asked me to thank you for buying her clothes yesterday. You're welcome." Philip's lips curled into a bitter smile as he shook his head and sighed. If I had personally given her those clothes, she definitely wouldn't have accepted them. The corners of Tang In's mouth curled up slightly, but for the sake of the sucker beside him, he instantly withdrew his smile. In order to achieve a realistic effect, the two men, Tang In and Philip, strolled around the streets for half a day yesterday. The feeling of it was, well, it was enough to know that it was strange and out of place. However, since they were shopping, they naturally had to buy things. The woman that Tang In disguised herself as had the figure of Josiah. Therefore, the pile of high-end clothes that she bought ended up belonging to Josiah. Just as Philip had said, if he were to personally deliver this thing, his fate would be no different from that confession in the Sea of Flowers. But when it was Tang In's hand, the effect was different. Other things aside, the set of gorgeous clothes that Tang In was wearing now was picked out by Josiah, excitedly for him to change into. As the saying went, one had to be kind, and one had to vote when reading books. Cough, cough. Anyway, since he had received something from Philip, regardless of whether he was willing or not, Tangan was now wearing the clothes that Philip had given him. Naturally, he could not gloat at his misfortune. After pretending not to hear anything, the two of them stepped into the hotel lobby. It was almost breakfast time now. None of the nobles were missing. They sat on both sides of the hall with a clear distinction, and the atmosphere was a little strange. This situation did not occur because the nobles had a good schedule, but because no one dared to be alone now. Therefore, no matter how tired they were, they had to follow the group and move around together. Philip was also a new noble in name, so the location of the meal was naturally at Ronald's side. Tangan had left a deep impression on them yesterday, so even though the new nobles were a little absent-minded, they still nodded politely. Some of them even called out the name Loris. With the traditional nobles sitting on the other side, the crowd naturally did not say anything important. Because of the current worrying situation, they did not even have the mood to talk about trivial things. It was the same on Simpson's side, so the atmosphere was very dull. About half an hour later, breakfast was over. Next, Ronald and the rest's activities were more complicated. Some stayed in the hotel, while others went out together. No matter what the situation was now, since they were in Mountain Stream City, they had to attend the necessary social activities. Moreover, it was broad daylight, so there shouldn't be any problems. As for Simpson's side, as long as they confirmed that Ronald and the rest did not gather together to secretly negotiate, they would not follow them. In the end, they usually just went about their own business. After declining a few invitations, Philip walked to the back with Tangan. This was not entirely to avoid the crowd. The main reason was that Philip's room had been changed, so he needed to reinstall the alarm system and other things. This high-end hotel naturally had a lot of rooms, and if this noble negotiation team excluded the accompanying cavalry, there were actually not many people. There were only a few dozen of them. At first, it was for convenience and mainly because the traditional nobles wanted to supervise them, so everyone stayed together. But now that both sides were showing signs of falling out and were suspicious of each other, they naturally did not continue to do so. Around last night, both sides of the nobles chose to look for new rooms at the same time. In the end, they each occupied the east and west ends of the second floor of the attic. Avoiding the waiters who came in to clean up the mess, the two of them walked out of the front hall and the back door. However, in an instant, Tangan's eyes suddenly flashed, and he turned his head slightly to look at the two waiters who had just passed by. Ha! These two fellows are really versatile. Sighing, Tangan's expression did not change as he continued to walk to the attic at the back. Tangan knew the two waiters just now. They were Bows and Bugnies. It was naturally not strange to see them here. After all, the circle of nobles in Mountain Stream City already knew what had happened here. As such, the police station was naturally under a lot of pressure. He just did not know if they wanted to wait for the rabbit to come out, or if they sensed that the murderer was among these people. Well, there was a need to communicate. With this thought in mind, Tangan entered the rather spectacular attic before him. As he walked up the wooden stairs, Philip explained the situation in a low voice. The first floor is basically occupied by the accompanying cavalrymen. It's also divided into two sides. We and the traditional nobles can basically control half of it. However, there are too many people and too many eyes. It's hard to guarantee that there won't be any traitors among them. I guess Simpson and the others usually rely on this to monitor our negotiations. The second floor is only occupied by the nobles and the administrative officials involved in this negotiation. There are a lot of empty rooms. We're staying in the 10 or so rooms on the easternmost side. Simpson and the others are on the west side, so they can't see each other. Here, take a look for yourself. Although this attic only had 2 floors, it occupied a very large area. The shape of the entire building presented an inward arc, a bit like a pair of open wings. Therefore, standing in the center, Tangan could only see the long corridors on both sides. As the arc gradually deepened, he could faintly see the wall at the end of the bend. It was somewhat dark. Although it was brightly lit, it gave off the feeling of a giant beast opening its bloody mouth to devour everything. Nodding, Tangan asked, "So, No one lives in the middle now. Not really. Philip shook his head and pointed at his feet. It's on the right side of the center of the first floor. Alex lives there. Well, do you still remember where you first saw him yesterday? He didn't move from there. Didn't he say he was leaving yesterday? Tangen asked in surprise. Yes, he packed his things. Philip spread out his hands with a strange look on his face. At that time, we were still resting in the room. I only heard about it when I came back at night. When Alex passed by the front hall, he had a little quarrel with Simpson. In the end, Alex seemed to have fought. Although they didn't fight, he was a little embarrassed. In a fit of pique, he simply went back to his original place and didn't leave. Really? This person. Tangen couldn't help but laugh when he heard that. He shook his head. Alex was neither a traditional aristocrat nor a new aristocrat. It could be said that he was purely a freeloader passing by. But now, he waded into this muddy water because of a dispute of personal feelings. It was no wonder that Philip was a little speechless. However, according to his style of doing things, it was normal for him to do something like this. After this episode, Tang In walked to the east. Let's go. Let's go to your room and take a look. Well, you have to pay attention to this matter. If there are any traps, just call out. I'm not afraid of seeing cruel scenes. In that case, how about burying a few explosive crystals? I guarantee that flesh and blood will splatter everywhere. It's inhumane. Of course, I can't guarantee that you'll see it. Chapter 438. Perhaps he had smelled the danger in the air, or perhaps he was afraid of the tight security of the inn, or perhaps he was simply enjoying the current atmosphere of fear. Regardless, the murderer hiding in the dark did not strike again, and the noble spent the next few days peacefully in the inn. Of course, everyone knew that this peace was just an illusion. As long as the murderer was not caught, and as long as the nobles were still in Mountain Stream City, this hidden threat would not stop. In the evening, the nobles were lying on their beds, their eyes barely half closed, their weapons by their hands. Suddenly, there was a slight movement, and they were abruptly awakened from their naps. They suddenly stood up, and when they saw the dim yellow light in the corridor outside and the patrolling figures of the guards, they heaved a sigh of relief and fell back onto their pillows weakly. This scene played out over and over in many rooms. Perhaps the reason for waking up was different, but the general mood was the same. However, there were always exceptions. In a pitch-black room in the inn, there were 3 people sitting quietly. After a while, "Sir, I've asked around. That seal is indeed the private seal of the Second Highness. It was previously in Ronald's care, but now it's been given to Philip." The voice was familiar. It was the voice of the black-robed man who had appeared in another ordinary inn. Philip, the man in the main seat, seemed to be scratching his head, looking helpless. He was too scared. If I had known, I would have killed that cowardly old man. Now that the seal is in Philip's hands, it's a little troublesome. So what? Another rather reckless voice sounded. Philip doesn't know any martial arts at all. As long as Sir says the word, we'll go get it again. The man who spoke earlier laughed bitterly and shook his head slightly. F***CK. The man in the main seat trembled when he heard this, and cursed involuntarily. He then gave a thumbs up and sighed. You're still the best. Luckily, I didn't ask you to do anything, or else we'd all be dead. If something really happens to Philip, all the noble families that came this time will probably be finished. No one knows that we did it. The man seemed to be aware of Philip's background and knew that he was being arrogant, but he still refuted in a small voice. The point is that the old man doesn't even need to know that we did it. As long as he knows that everyone here is suspicious, he won't mind killing everyone here. His slightly bitter tone sounded even more helpless because what he said was the truth. The room fell into a short period of silence. The 3 of them were a little speechless, as if they were affected by some kind of overwhelming power that they were unable to resist. After a while, the person who spoke first coughed twice. Ahem, boss, our goal is only the seal. There are many ways to bypass Philip, I know. It's just that. The man on the main seat nodded and said hesitantly, the timing of the seal's appearance is too coincidental. My lord, I have my doubts as well. The one who answered was naturally not the reckless person. The person who answered earlier said calmly, but we've also investigated many times. The place where Ronald and the others talked about the seal was at the stairs on the second floor. Judging from the situation at that time, we can be sure that it was just a casual chat. As for the traditional nobleman, he went back to his room to get his clothes for the party. It was a complete coincidence. Afterward, when Ronald handed the seal to the unaware Philip in the hall, we were also there. He probably wanted to frame Philip. It's a coincidence, but it's also very reasonable. I heard that when they were talking about the seal, the woman called Loris was also there? Yes, she was feeling a little unwell, so she went back to her room with Ronald and the others. My lord, are you suspecting her? A little. It's just a feeling. There's nothing wrong with her speech and actions. Philip has a good eye this time. This kind of feeling was naturally not easy to analyze, so the other two didn't say anything. The man on the main seat also knew this and finally hammered his hand. Let's do it. The opportunity is fleeting. We have to try. The atmosphere in the room suddenly relaxed. The person who spoke earlier nodded and said, if we get the seal, this mission can basically be completed in advance. Also, we don't have to do it ourselves. It can be considered as reducing the risk. After a pause, he turned to the reckless person and said, oh right, is the thief you found reliable? He patted his chest. Don't worry, he's been tested. He's definitely professional. Not only is his skill top-notch, but his combat energy is also faintly at a high level. More importantly, this thief isn't a local, so he won't cause any trouble for us in the future. Very good, but we still can't be careless. The man on the main seat pointed to the person who came up with the idea earlier. You bring some people and be in charge of cleaning up. As for you, he said to the reckless person, if there's any trouble in the operation, you have to rush out and clean up the scene at the first opportunity to not leave any loose ends. I don't need to give you an excuse. Forget it. I'll explain it to you clearly. You just say, when you came out to the toilet, you accidentally saw this sneaky person. In order to ensure the safety of the nobles, you followed him all the way here. You don't have to wear armor. Your clothes are a little messy. Any other questions? This person was very thoughtful and very cautious. Although it was very scattered, he had considered all aspects and could be said to be watertight. Yes. The man with the reckless tone raised his hand and said, I forgot to mention. When I was looking for people at the Thieves' Guild, I saw a few familiar people. After thinking about it, I realized that they were the butlers of the nobles on Simpson's side. They were also looking for the thief, and seemed to have the same plan as us. These things can't do anything right, but are good at spoiling things. The man on the main seat was annoyed. He waved his arm and then said in a low voice, bring some people with you later and try your best to dig them out. In short, before our thief goes up to the second floor, no one is allowed to go near Philip's room. Yes. The two of them nodded and answered at the same time. His anger had not subsided, and he continued, His Highness is also muddle-headed. Why did he send these idiots over? But it's just as well. The traditional nobles don't need these low IQ people. I'll take this opportunity to get rid of them one by one. His Highness is probably careless and looks down on the gray coat army, but it's very appropriate for him to ask you to come over. The person who spoke earlier was quick-witted and immediately offered the perfect horse. Happy laughter. It was obvious that the man on the main seat enjoyed it very much. He then waved his hand and said generously, all right, that's it then. Any other questions? Yes. Just when the atmosphere was at its peak, the reckless man raised his hand again. The room was silent. The other two were speechless. However, the person involved did not realize this and said to himself, we can't hurt Philip, but what about that woman? How should I explain it to that thief? Let him decide based on the situation. It's best if he doesn't kill her. Of course, it's okay to kill her. She's just a woman. At most, it'll make Philip depressed for a while. Understood. Then it's best if there aren't any accidents. This girl is really pretty. It's a pity to kill her. Oh, tempted? That's difficult. but that Philip likes the new and hates the old. You still have a chance. Hee, I think so too. You're not picky about food. The words that follow were more and more about men's hobbies. I won't go into detail. However, one thing could be confirmed. If the person involved in these words, Tang In, knew about this, he would definitely come over tonight to kill them and strangle this scourge in the bud, of course. Tang In didn't know that. He was chatting with Philip in the room. You're saying that the other party will make a move tonight? Philip sat up from the bed and asked in shock. I'm just saying that it's possible. Tang In sat at the table in the room. He was still dressed like a woman. He picked up a teacup and took a sip. His posture was elegant and calm. We got the seal yesterday and released the news that we're going to continue the negotiations. Looking at the time, the other party will test us around tonight. Damn, why didn't you say so earlier? Philip rushed out of the bed. After rummaging around, he found a dagger with a cold gleam and a crossbow with arrows loaded. He then picked up an inconspicuous thick leather belt and wrapped it around his body. Smacking his lips, Tang In asked doubtfully, Forget about the dagger and crossbow. Why did you take the belt? You don't understand. This is my secret weapon, Philip replied casually. He jumped back onto the bed. First, he put the crossbow in the bed. Then, he put the dagger under the pillow. However, he felt that it wasn't safe, so he put it next to his hand and finally hugged it in his arms. Tang In looked at Philip and pouted. I told you not to worry. With me here, they won't be able to come in. Philip hugged the dagger and burrowed into the bed. He sneered disdainfully and said righteously, Huffed. It's because you're here. Who knows if you won't kill me? Your biggest rival in love. Twain smacked his forehead and grinned. He was really speechless at this idiot. After a while, he suddenly asked, How's your sleeping habit? It depends on whether there's a woman. If there is, then of course it's against the rules. If there isn't, I don't know. Aren't you talking nonsense? Without a woman next to you, who knows what will happen? Shaking his head, Tang In said weakly, Then I'll say something else. You better not think of the dagger as a woman. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that I won't be able to see you in one piece tomorrow morning. What do you mean? There was a cry of surprise. The bed was turned over and the dagger was thrown out. Tang In pinched the bridge of his nose and put down the teacup. He turned off the lights and jumped onto the roof beam. He didn't care about this idiot anymore. Rustling sounds could be heard. Tang, can you turn on the lights? I can't find the dagger. Phew. Don't move your left hand. Move to the right. I found it. Tang, do you have night vision? How did you practice this? Or was it natural? Do you need to eat eagle brains? Oh, I don't think so. Tang, don't tell me you're asleep. Say something. Just say something. Oh, I'm not scared. I just want to communicate. Yes, that's it. Tang In. Loris? Miss Cece. Say something. Chapter 439. Yes, that's right. After responding subconsciously, the black figure's body trembled as if a cold wind had blown past his neck. Then, without turning around, he advanced instead of retreating. He took a step forward, and his right arm bent, holding an imperceptible blade light like a whip. His reaction was fast, but unfortunately, his arm was only halfway out when his joint was caught, and he couldn't move an inch further. The black figure did not panic because this was just a feint. His left elbow and right foot were silently moving backward. Bang, bang. Two muffled sounds were heard. The man in black felt a chill in his heart because his two hidden attacks were both neutralized by the soft force behind him. Then they were firmly locked down. Lie down. A teasing voice sounded behind his ear. A woman? The man in black was surprised. Then he felt a pain in his left knee, which was the only support he had. He fell forward involuntarily. It's over. Although there were only a few close combat exchanges, and the process only took a breath, the black-clothed man knew in his heart that victory and defeat had already been decided. His instant counterattack was fast and sharp. Normally, even if he could not turn the situation around, it would not be a problem for him to escape. But the woman behind him was really terrifying. Not only was her reaction not slower than his, but she also completely understood his intention. Therefore, it was no wonder that he was about to die. Bang, it was still a soft force. The sound was not loud, but the man in black was completely pressed to the ground with his face down. He had no chance to escape. In a flash, the black mask on his face was taken off. TSK, as expected. Say, who are you? Who sent you? Although he was surprised by the woman's as expected tone, the man in black was happy that he was not killed immediately. He thought quickly, let's talk. I'm Arthur. I'm just a little thief. I want to steal something. Arthur. There was a moment of silence. Then she said, oh, is it really like this? No, you're lying to me. There's a way. The man in black was relieved. Then he complained in a more sorrowful tone. I'm innocent. I'm already like this. How would I dare to lie to you? I heard that there are few rich people living here. I want to steal something to support my family. It's a pity that I have elders and children to take care of. I have no other choice but to embark on this path of no return. I see. Well, I'll believe you for now. Did you find a seal? Not yet, huh? The black-robed man was drenched in sweat. F***, I've been tricked. No, I didn't hear you clearly. W, what did you say just now? After stuttering to remedy the situation, the man in black anxiously waited for the response behind him. Unexpectedly, he was hit on the back of his head, and the pressure on his back lessened. The same playful but not melodious female voice sounded. You want to be a thief with your IQ? The future is bleak. Why don't you go back, wash up, and sleep? TSK, you even use my name. You're really embarrassing me. What do you mean? The man in black turned around and looked at the curvaceous woman in front of him in confusion. His face was full of astonishment, and then he suddenly opened his mouth. Wait, your name? F***, Tang in. And he's not that stupid. He can still be saved. Shrugging, Tang and leaned over and stretched out his hand. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Long time no see, Jack. That's right. This unlucky thief who came in the middle of the night and was beaten up was Jack, whom he hadn't seen for a long time. After the two of them digested this information that couldn't be more coincidental, they looked at each other and couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha, Tang, you look like this. Ha, woman. I'm dying of laughter. I can't. Laughing at me? Why don't you think about your previous situation? Ha. Do you know when you were pressed down by the table, almost fell from the roof beam laughing, ha? Although they hadn't seen each other for a while, their mocking words quickly closed the gap between them. After a while, the two of them finally stopped laughing. Tang unwaved his hand. Let's not talk about it. And, by the way, why are you here to steal things? Whether it was a thief, an assassin, or a mercenary, it was a common rule that they couldn't betray their employer's information. However, according to the relationship between the two of them, Jack naturally wouldn't care about this. He said without hesitation, didn't I just receive a mission? The reward is not bad. It's a big job. It's not that I want to say this, but if that thing isn't important, hurry up and give it to me. We're friends. I can give you 30%. That's enough, right? Of course, this was a joke. Tang chuckled and shook his head. He didn't continue the conversation. After confirming that Jack wasn't in cahoots with those men in black, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief and laughed again. You're quite bold. Don't you know that Bose is here? Damn, of course I know. Although they hadn't met for a long time, Jack still quivered when he heard this. His body trembled. I just arrived in Mountain Stream City about 10 days ago. I originally wanted to leave after I learned about this. But then I heard that Bose went to the neighboring city to investigate a case. I just happened to be a little short on money, so I naturally had to do a job first. Went to the neighboring city to investigate a case. There's such a thing. Tang In frowned, then thought of Bose and the Bugnes in disguise. He nodded thoughtfully. No wonder. So that's why. Who are you? There's an assassin. Before Tang Un's murmur fell, a sudden shout came from outside, followed by an uninterrupted clamor. Where are you? Light up. Want to leave? Die for me. Ha, great. There's another one here. He jumped off the building, quickly block him. How are the nobles? Quickly go and take a look. Feeling the vibrations from the floor of the house, as well as the chaotic situation outside, Tang In and Jack looked at each other in shock. You have an accomplice? How is that possible? I've always been alone. Thinking quickly, Tang took out something from his arms and handed it over. He asked, "If you succeed, where is the transaction location?" "A tavern in the West District." "What is it, a seal?" Tang, I was just joking earlier. Don't talk nonsense. Let's go, I'll go with you. Tang took Jack a few steps forward and opened the back window. The back garden was brightly lit, as bright as day. Although it was a little chaotic, many cavalrymen could be seen shuttling back and forth. But perhaps because the intruders did not escape here, there was no fighting scene. How did you get in the first place? Let's go back the way we came. The route map given by the employer now. I don't know if that route still works. Let's give it a try, let's go. Jack patted the window and jumped down while the patrolling cavalryman below had just passed by. Tang looked back at the situation in the room and no longer hesitated. He turned over and closed the window, and his body fell quickly. Along the way, they rushed out of the vicinity of the tavern almost without any pause. Of course, this did not mean that the cavalryman's defense was bad. For such a result, it could only mean that Jack's route map was very reliable, or that the employer was not simple at the same time, perhaps because the number and strength of the intruders were very weak. The chaos in the tavern gradually subsided. West District, a tavern in a remote street with a dim yellow signboard. The tavern was naturally open at night, but at this time, the people who stayed here were basically homeless or drunkards who had drunk so much that they had forgotten where their homes were. Their homes were basically carried out by the waiters and thrown to the side of the street. After all, the people in the tavern also needed to rest. The waiter leaning against the counter opened his mouth and yawned loudly. He opened his sleepy eyes and looked at the hall. Then, he listlessly dozed off again. This was naturally because there were still guests. However, he did not intend to chase them away. One must know that these people were very generous. Just the tips they gave were enough for him to earn for more than 10 days. For such rich people, he naturally hoped that they would stay a little longer. At this moment, bang, the two doors of the tavern were pushed open. The dozing waiter subconsciously raised his head and saw a sallow middle-aged man walk into the tavern and casually look around. He pulled himself together and greeted, "Sir, what would you like to order?" "Black rum, the strongest kind. Remember, don't mix it with water." "Sir, don't worry. 2 silver coins, thank you." "Put on my tab." The sallow middle-aged man and the waiter turned their heads at the same time. In the empty hall, there were only 3 people sitting at a table. 2 of them were expressionless strong men, and the other was a thin, middle-aged man in gray clothes. The one who spoke was the middle-aged man in gray clothes. At this time, he was holding a wine glass and pointing to the seat opposite him. He smiled and greeted from afar. "Mr. Jack, please sit." The waiter heard this and retreated. Jack looked over and frowned. In the end, he walked over and sat down. He said stiffly, "I don't think I know you." Jack was a very common name. There were at least hundreds of thousands of people in the brand who called him that. So, unless it was a special occasion, Jack never cared about revealing his name. As for the realistic disguise on his face, it was naturally the one given to him by Tang. The middle-aged man in gray clothes didn't care about Jack's tone. He still smiled and said, "Indeed, but we have a common friend, Haber." Jack suddenly raised his head. His eyes were sharp like a knife. Then he restrained himself and said, "He is just an employer, not a friend. After making a deal, naturally we will become friends, just like you and me." The middle-aged man in gray clothes pointed at each other and put down his wine glass. "Well, let's not talk nonsense. Since Mr. Jack can come here, the mission must have been completed, right?" After a short pause, the waiter brought the black rum over and left immediately. Jack raised his eyebrows. "So what?" "Very good. You are indeed a top thief." The middle-aged man in gray clothes was happy. He clapped his hands and praised. Then he took out a dark red wooden box from his arms and pushed it to the middle of the table. "This is the reward, 1,000 gold coins." Jack's pupil shrank. He couldn't help but lick his lips. Then his face suddenly changed, and he looked away. "What does this mean?" The middle-aged man in gray clothes frowned. "And, Mr. Jack, are you kidding? Of course, this is a deal." "A deal?" Jack shook his head and tried not to look at the dark red wooden box below. Sorry, I only deal with employers. The middle-aged man in gray clothes looked at both sides and spread out his hands. He seemed to be a little confused. You are a thief, and this is the reward. Leave the thing and take the reward. Isn't the deal done? Sorry, I'm not a person who cares about money. I am a traditional person who follows the rules. Chapter 440. Sorry, I'm not a person who cares about money. I'm a traditional person who abides by the rules. The tone was upright, the content was awe-inspiring, and the righteousness was all over the place. The middle-aged man in gray was pressed down on the bench by these words. He was stunned for a long time and didn't say anything. After coming back to his senses, he loosened his collar and said with a tangled face, Thief, traditional, abiding by the rules? After a slight pause, he laughed, and then his expression returned to normal. He spread his hands on the side of the table and tapped a few times. Sorry, I didn't mean that. Well, I appreciate people with principles. You see, the matter is like this. Haber is busy now and can't come, so he can only entrust me, a friend, to complete the transaction. In other words, I'm now your employer. Any other questions? Jack said with a serious face. Haber asked you to come? Yes. Where's the evidence? Bang. The loud sound of the table slamming echoed in the hall. The two expressionless, strong men who had been sitting next to him suddenly stood up. Their cold aura was pressing on Jack. The waiter who was leaning on the counter in the distance staggered and almost fell to the ground. The middle-aged man in gray was livid. Evidence, evidence. What bullshit evidence? Do you want me to take out the letter of entrustment? Two high-level warriors, damn. Jack glanced at the two strong men. His heart was beating like a drum, but his face was still calm and rigid. It's okay to have a letter. The middle-aged man waved his arms twice and laughed nervously. He waved his hand at the panicked waiter in the distance. Can I trouble you to bring another barrel of wine? Yes, rum bar. Yes, yes, sir. The customer's request naturally had to be satisfied, but now the owner was not here. The only waiter looked over with worry, finally shook his head, and quickly walked to the wine cellar behind. What the F***ck are you doing? How could you even run into such a top-notch thief? First, he seemed to scold Haber. Then the middle-aged man in gray fixed his eyes on Jack and spread his hands. I don't care if you're like this or just want to raise the price. I really don't have time to play this kind of boring game with you. This is the last deal. Hand over the seal, and you can take the reward. In silence, Jack blinked and touched his forehead as if he was thinking. When he saw the person holding the wine barrel at the back door of the hall, he let out a long sigh. Sorry, I am a man of principle. Nodding his head in understanding, the gray-robed, middle-aged man leaned back and pinched the bridge of his nose. You know what? I was intending to wait for you to leave with the bounty before making my move. Ha! Make your move. With a loud shout, the two burly men's eyes flashed fiercely. They waved their hands and were about to attack. Bang, the table trembled. Everyone's vision blurred for a moment, and the wine barrel landed on the table. Your wine. The atmosphere suddenly stagnated. The gray-clothed, middle-aged man's vision was blocked. He couldn't help but curse. Get the hell out of here, huh? This was naturally directed at the inexplicable waiter. However, before he could finish speaking, he paused and lowered his head, only to see a dented dagger resting against his neck. It's late at night. Don't be so hot-tempered. Come, get up. Be obedient. Sister will give you candy. A beautiful woman came out from behind the middle-aged man, smiling sweetly. Needless to say, this was naturally Tang, who had hurried out of the hotel with Jack. It happened so suddenly that the two expressionless, burly men couldn't help but be stunned. Then, a chill ran down their spines. It was reasonable to say that the distance from the back door of the hall to here was not close. From their perspective, they should have discovered that the waiter had been replaced. That's right, during this period of time, their attention had been diverted. However, at their level of strength, even if the other party had disguised himself as a waiter, they should have been able to tell that there was something wrong with the other party's temperament and feeling, let alone the other party's vastly different appearance. However, the other party was now so close to them, and they still didn't notice the gray-clothed middle-aged man didn't think so much. He slowly got up, and his face was calm. Interesting. Are you trying to take advantage of me? He tilted his head slightly. You are really principled. It's you. After seeing the woman's face, the middle-aged man's face changed dramatically, and he cried out involuntarily. You know me? Well, what a clumsy disguise. Tang uncurled his lips and reached out to pick up the wine glass from the table. He splashed the wine on the middle-aged man's face, and then rubbed his face with his big hands. Let me see if I know you. To be honest, after constantly wandering on the edge of death, there weren't many things that could surprise Tang Yin. However, looking at the face in front of him, he still felt a little absent-minded. Under the disguise, it was still the face of a middle-aged man. He wasn't familiar with it, but with Tang Yin's memory, he could still remember that this person was the housekeeper who often walked behind Alex. This person wasn't enough to make Tang Yin feel absent-minded. What made him feel absent-minded was Alex's reckless words and deeds. Although he was high-profile, no one really took him seriously, and he didn't need others to think highly of him. This date just happened to give him the best opportunity to conceal himself and quietly observe. Of course, if it weren't for the fact that karma was the cause, Tang Yin wouldn't have thought of this. There was a good saying, if you scold someone as an idiot, they might be scolding you as an idiot in their heart. Alex was playing the role of a scolding idiot. Bang! The wooden table exploded together with a wine barrel. The wine spilled everywhere, and the space in this area became a little blurry at this moment. Perhaps seeing the absent-minded look in Tang Yin's eyes, the two brawny men looked at each other and rushed to save him without hesitation. One of them reached out to grab the sword, while the other punched towards Tang Yin's head. Perhaps because they were afraid of hurting the middle-aged housekeeper who didn't have any strength, the two men didn't release their do chi. However, at such a close distance, relying on the swift and fierce speed given to them by the strength of high-level martial artists, as well as the explosive power of thunder, their fighting strength didn't weaken at all. But unfortunately, they met Tang Yin, who was better at this kind of fighting style. Just as the two men moved, Tang Yin instantly recovered and pushed with one hand. Whoosh! The middle-aged housekeeper broke through the water curtain and passed through the two men's fists. Catch! With a faint voice, Jack on the opposite side subconsciously grabbed the middle-aged housekeeper. When he looked up, he saw Tang Yin's bright and enchanting figure appearing and disappearing in the water curtain, as if it was being cut. One gave birth to two, two gave birth to four. The changes were unpredictable, like a mess of flowers that confused the eyes. It was a bit out of place, but Jack had to admit that Tang Yin, who was dressed as a woman, showed a stunning beauty at this moment. Although his line of sight was confused by the ghostly figure, Jack was still sensitive enough to catch two faint blade lights. Well, it should be blade lights, although there were more white splashes on the wine. Just as he was confirming, Jack's vision blurred again, and Tang Yin appeared in front of him. His expression was calm, and his gorgeous clothes weren't damaged at all, nor was there a drop of wine stain on them. Over his shoulder, the water curtain behind him fell with a loud bang. The water droplets splashed everywhere, and there was a trace of blood inside. The two high-level martial artists maintained their attacking posture and stood quietly in the same place. Although the expressions on their faces couldn't be seen, they must be puzzled. A moment later, bang, bang, the two strong men fell to the ground almost at the same time. There were no obvious wounds, but blood had spread out along with the wine. Not only Jack, but the middle-aged housekeeper who turned his head was also stunned. His lips moved, but he couldn't say anything. Tang Yin didn't have this awareness. He stepped in front of the middle-aged housekeeper, waved his hand in front of him, and smacked his lips. "TSK, I have to say, you gave me a big surprise." I want to say, Jack came back to his senses and sighed. "You also gave me a big surprise." After a pause, he shook his head speechlessly. No, it should be said that it was a shock. Two high-level martial artists, face to face, do you have to be so perverted? Well, I'll try to change next time. Tang In casually responded. His gaze was still focused on the middle-aged housekeeper's face. Is there anything you want to say? Well, I'm more curious about Alex. You're dead. You're dead. The middle-aged housekeeper reacted. His expression was a little scared, but he still forced himself to say, Do you think that's all our strength? Outside, there are still 6 people lying in ambush outside, right? Tang In interrupted his words and spread his hands. Unfortunately, you didn't bring enough, and you're not smart enough. I came in from outside. Guess where they now? The middle-aged housekeeper opened his mouth. His face was ashen, and he couldn't say anything. Come, take it, drink a glass of wine to calm down. The night is still long, so I won't say any threatening words. You're a smart person, and you know the situation now, so I hope our conversation will go smoothly. Well, let's begin. First question, where are the rest of the black-clothed men? Chapter 441. The next day at dawn, the sun had yet to rise from the east. It was supposed to be the time for the women to get up early to prepare for the family's meal. However, in the high-class hotel, the nobles also got up early to move about. Last night's chaos was brief, but still affected them. Now, everyone was not in a good state. They rubbed their red eyes and yawned, looking tired. They should not have gotten up so early, but now they had a reason to. At this time, a middle-aged man in armor returned from the lobby of the hotel. He bowed to the nobles when he saw them and greeted the cavalrymen when he saw them. After entering the loft, his face darkened. He turned to the right and stopped in front of a door. He knocked twice and pushed the door open. Sir, the Gray Coat Army's negotiators have arrived at the door. Do you need to go over? Inside the room, Ares sat quietly at the table. He tapped his forehead with his finger and had a thoughtful look on his face. It was completely different from his usual rude and arrogant temperament. He did not answer the question. Instead, he raised his head and asked an irrelevant question. Not back yet? The question was abrupt, but the middle-aged man in the role of a guard naturally knew what it meant. He shook his head and said no. After a pause, he continued, Sir, don't worry. Although the housekeeper is a bit weak, he has always been cautious. Plus, he brought 8 family loyalists with him. Nothing will happen. Yes, when I came back from outside, I saw Philip. He had a flustered look on his face and was abnormally nervous. That thief must have succeeded. Therefore, the housekeeper should be dealing with the aftermath. He will be back soon. Yes. After a while, Ares nodded and agreed with this deduction. He then stood up and rubbed his palms. He said, You said that the Gray Coat Army's people have arrived? So early? The middle-aged man nodded and smiled with a hint of schadenfreude. Yes. To be precise, they sent someone to deliver the invitation half an hour ago. They just happened to arrive. This is going to be interesting. Ares laughed and shook his head. Ha, these ignorant old worms. Yes, they're a bit smart. They were naturally talking about yesterday's incident. Apart from Jack, there were also a few thieves hired by the traditional nobles who had sneaked in. However, after Ares and the others found out about this matter, they naturally would not allow any changes to occur to their plans. Therefore, when those thieves approached the loft last night, they were caught red-handed by the middle-aged man guarding the place. What happened next was interesting. After a short battle, the exposed bandits were all killed by the cavalry, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Immediately, someone stood up and pointed out that these bandits seemed to have appeared in the negotiation team of the Gray Coat Army. There was no doubt that this was a false accusation, but that was all the traditional nobles needed. It could be said that this move of theirs was very beautiful. If the thief succeeded, then the seal would be in their hands. Everything would be fine. Since the bandits had failed, they would kill them to silence them. Without any psychological pressure, they would push the blame to the Gray Coat Army. But why did the Gray Coat Army come so early? Forget it. Let's go take a look. Unable to understand, Ares shook his head and walked towards the door. After pausing for a moment, he threw a key to the middle-aged man. You'll go with me. Come out again in half an hour. If the housekeeper hasn't returned by then, you'll bring some people to that tavern. Yes. The middle-aged man subconsciously glanced at a certain spot in the room. He bowed slightly and then opened the wooden door, allowing Ares to walk out. The negotiation this time was brought up by the Gray Coat Army, so it was very rushed. Thus, at this moment, all the nobles were already at the entrance of the tavern, so the attic appeared very quiet. Just as he walked out of the attic, Ares raised his eyebrows and saw a beautiful woman walking quickly towards him. She opened her mouth and laughed loudly. Huh, so it's Miss Loris. Philip isn't inside. For some reason, Ares seemed to see a rather strange expression on this beautiful woman's face. However, when he looked carefully, it was an anxious expression. Oh, greetings, Sir Ares. I'll come back to look for something. The seal? But for her to look for it, it seemed that Philip was really anxious. Ares' heart calmed down, but he still looked puzzled on the surface. Look for something? Let's hear it, and see if I've seen it before. That's right. Why didn't I think of it? It's a book called An Actor's Self-Cultivation. Sir Ares, have you seen it before? What's self-cultivation? Looking at the woman's back as she hurriedly ran into the attic, Ares scratched his head and turned his head to ask, Isn't it a seal? The middle-aged man spread his hands. Naturally, he didn't know what was going on. Shaking his head in confusion, the two men walked towards the front hall. Thus, they naturally didn't notice that the woman didn't return to her room on the second floor after entering the attic. Instead, she turned her head to give him a glance. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly, and she directly turned to the right side of the first floor. Needless to say, this was naturally Tang En. What a good actor! Tang En secretly praised Ares and smacked his lips. Then, he looked at the door signs and finally stopped in front of the door. It was Ares' room. Looking left and right, he saw that the corridor was empty and quiet. Approaching the door, he flipped his hand and revealed his dagger. Then, he slowly slid it down the door. Tang En was an assassin, not a thief. Although he knew how to pick locks, he wasn't a professional. It would be faster to break it with brute force. After all, he didn't come here to steal anything. Click. With a soft sound, the door lock inside was directly broken. The corners of Tang En's mouth curled up. He pushed the door open and entered. Then he was stunned. Tang En had the courage to come in directly. Naturally, he was sure that there was no one in the room, and this was indeed the case. However, the window on the side of the door was now wide open. A person dressed as a waiter was leaning against the edge of the window and bending over to climb in. There seemed to be many people behind him. Tang En and the waiter immediately looked at each other. Their bodies stiffened, and they looked at each other in dismay. It was quite quiet and strange. What's the matter, old Bao? He asked softly. Then another head popped up from under the window. Breaking the silence, Tang En and the waiter did the same thing. In an instant, they reached into their arms and took out their crossbows. However, perhaps because they both had scruples, they didn't immediately shoot the crossbow. After chuckling a few times and seeing the face of the waiter, Tang En waved his hand and put away the crossbow. The corners of his mouth curled up. Good morning, Your Excellency Bose. Well, as the chief of the police force, it's not very good to sneak in through the window. Yes, the waiter opposite him whose face was covered by hair and only his right eye was exposed was Bose. However, he didn't put down the crossbow now. He still held it cautiously and frowned. Who are you? Loris. The other person who popped his head out was surprised. He looked at Tang En's appearance and said subconsciously, Oh, Cavalry Chief Bugnes is also here. Tang En glanced at him and revealed the other person's identity. Bose and Bugnes' hearts sank at the same time. Their faces were disguised. Even if they were seen through, they wouldn't be recognized. There was only one explanation, and that was that the other party had already known of their existence. You two don't have to think too much. I wanted to communicate with you earlier. After a moment of silence, Tang En returned to his normal voice. He turned his hand and showed the pitted dagger. After all, we have worked together once. We can be considered old acquaintances. It's you. Bose and Bugnes exclaimed at the same time. They looked at each other with astonishment. Although knowing the other party's details couldn't shorten the distance between them, at least they could avoid the situation of an immediate fight. After greeting the back, Bose and Bugnes entered the room. Tang, and put away the crossbow and dagger and closed the door behind him. He took the lead and said, "It seems that our goal is the same. Well, why did you enter Alex's room? Why didn't you speak first?" Bose was used to being domineering. Naturally, he didn't want to be questioned by a mole. Tang, and spread his hands. An exchange of information. I'm sure that I know more than you. So naturally, you should speak first. Oh, Bose glanced at Tang, on with disdain. He then pointed at the room and circled it. If I say that there are other people in this room, would you believe me? Yes. Tang and raised his eyebrows and curled his lips. And I know where they are hiding. Where's the main door of the mechanism? Well, do you want to know? Bose opened his mouth, and his expression was somewhat dazed. Bugny stepped forward without hesitation and extended his fist. Deal. The fists met. Deal. At the same time, at the entrance of the hotel. You still dare to come? Simpson's old face was red as he roared angrily. He looked like he was about to rush forward and fight with his life. Of course, he was stopped by a few nobles after a few steps. They waved their fists and kicked him, unwilling to let him go. Don't stop me. How dare you kill a noble? You're dead meat. Ronald, you dare to negotiate? If you dare to negotiate, we'll meet at the Imperial Court when we get back. Don't stop me. At the bottom of the stairs in front of the door, Josiah and a few high-ranking members of the secret organization looked at them coldly and frowned. Why wouldn't I dare to come? Good, you have guts. Then, do you dare to admit what you did? There was a trap in this vague sentence. The traditional nobles intended to force the other party to admit it in one go. However, after Joshua responded, he did not pay any more attention to this side. He met Ronald's gaze and asked, "Where is the negotiation location?" It was difficult to find a place in such a hurry. Ronald paused and waved his hand in an inviting gesture. "The hotel side hall, please." In fact, Ronald and the rest had doubts in their hearts. It was not because of what happened last night. Their IQ was not that low. Through Philip, they had been on the phone with Josiah. Although they were mostly building a relationship of trust, the negotiation was indeed progressing slowly. They were very satisfied with this method. However, Josiah's sudden arrival this morning without any notice naturally made them a little confused. Why didn't you answer? Didn't you say you dared to? Are you feeling guilty? Let me tell you, the traditional nobles were still unwilling to give up. However, whether it was Ronald and the rest, or Josiah and the rest, they ignored them and went straight into the hotel's front hall as if they did not hear them. As soon as they disappeared, the cursing stopped. Simpson stopped his crazy actions and tidied up his clothes. He curled his lips in disdain. They're just a few lowly commoners. They want to fight with me. Let's go to the side hall again. I'd like to see how they're going to negotiate. Since they had decided to say that the bandits were from the Gray Coat Army, they naturally had to make sure that the charges were true. Moreover, even if they did not have any evidence, they had to pretend to be the victim and take the high ground first. These nobles might not be good at other things, but they were first class at playing mind games. Chapter 442. Although they were a little surprised that the other party chose to negotiate at this time, since they were already here, Ronald and the others naturally wouldn't refuse. There were several side halls on the side of the attic. They were originally meant for nobles and wealthy merchants to work. Now, the largest room was just right for the negotiation. After the greetings, the negotiation officially began. Simpson and the other traditional nobles still fully displayed their characteristics of stirring up shit, especially when they found out that the person called Arthur from the Gray Coat Army wasn't here. Their momentum immediately rose, and they went into pestering mode from the beginning. Ronald and the others were already used to it. They continued to discuss the conditions that they had recorded and the results of the previous secret negotiations. There weren't many changes on the side of the aristocratic negotiation team, but the Gray Cloth Army was a little confusing. There were people who negotiated, and there were also people who quarreled. However, as the person in charge, Joshua leaned back in his chair from the beginning. His arms were crossed in front of his chest, and his face was indifferent. It was a mixture of expressionless and calm. This state clearly showed that he didn't want to interfere. Of course, This wasn't the attitude that a negotiation should have. Originally, even if there were anger and other emotions, when it came to the negotiation table, what should be endured had to be endured, and what should be discussed had to be discussed. However, Josiah insisted on this, and the new noble couldn't do anything. Fortunately, the others around her weren't like this. They were still actively discussing with the attitude of starting a negotiation. Otherwise, Ronald and the others would really think that the other party was deliberately making fun of them. There were those who spoke seriously, those who were unreasonable, and those who were silent. In short, people who didn't know the inside story and the negotiation time were baffling. In the end, this seemingly somewhat ridiculous negotiation scene was put together. Haha, I'm not saying this, but do you know how to negotiate? How can you be like this? How can you make Sir Ronald and the others feel? This isn't strange, Sir Ronald. The leader of the Grey Coat Army, Losha, is a woman, and now the one who is negotiating is also a woman. Women, especially civilian women, are more suitable to go home, wash clothes, cook, and have children. Negotiation? Isn't this nonsense? Sai, you can't say that. Look at the northern wilderness. Isn't it just a wolf girl in power? So, the key is still up to you. Hey, you, let me teach you how to negotiate. Ronald and the others had nothing to say about Josiah's condition, but Simpson and the other traditional nobles naturally wouldn't let him off. Thinking back to the previous two negotiations, the first time was in the other party's home ground, and their momentum was directly suppressed, especially when Simpson fell at the end, which made them speechless and ashamed. In the second negotiation, they finally took the initiative with great difficulty, but in the end, a guy called Arthur appeared, and his sharp words made them want to vomit blood. In the end, they could only retreat in defeat. Although the other side still had a few people supporting them, they no longer had an overwhelming advantage like the previous two times. It could be said that it was rare for Simpson and the others to see the light of victory. Furthermore, the leader of the opposing team was obviously not in his best condition. Naturally, they had to beat the enemy while they were down. However, there was a saying that only by resisting and struggling could one feel a stronger sense of excitement. Although it was satisfying, there was no response from the other party. Obviously, it was not fun at all. Therefore, Simpson actually wanted to teach the other party how to negotiate. This wasn't just simple pestering. Simpson had been a noble all his life and had negotiated countless times with others. Naturally, he was well-versed. Although he didn't have good results now, it was mainly because he was old and his thinking and reactions were a little slow. If you asked him to slowly talk while drinking tea, it was quite obvious that he had a good foundation. It could be said that he could speak freely and fluently. It wasn't that he was being kind. He probably wanted to teach the other party first so that he could feel the thrill of crushing the other party. Josiah on the other side was also acting strangely. Although he didn't say anything, his gaze would occasionally move over, as if he was listening and also as if he was in a daze. But no matter what, this gave Simpson enough motivation, and he spoke with more enthusiasm. Thus, the scene became even more strange. The people near the middle of the table were negotiating with their heads close together. The people on the right were slamming the table from time to time and shouting at each other with red faces. On the left, there was a harmonious scene of constant guidance and earnest teaching. What a mess! Alex, who was at the back of the table, held his forehead and pretended to be unable to bear it. What he had hoped to see was a big war of words between the two sides because of what happened last night. But who would have thought that the Grey Coat Army wouldn't take the bait at all? This made him somewhat disappointed. It's been about half an hour. It's time to go out. Just as Alex was about to leave, the door to the side hall was pushed open, and an ordinary-looking young man walked in. The scene suddenly fell silent, mainly because the traditional nobles who had been shouting loudly had stopped talking. They looked at each other, and unpleasant memories surged into their minds. Their expressions were somewhat ugly. Was it that Arthur? Alex's heart skipped a beat. He immediately sat down again, looking forward to the next scene. However, Arthur, who had changed the atmosphere as soon as he came in, didn't do anything shocking. He only leaned over and whispered something in the female leader's ear. About 3 minutes later, he straightened his body. However, he didn't sit down on the seat beside her. Instead, he looked around and saw Philip in the corner. He nodded his head in greeting before walking toward the crowd beside the door. That was where the nobles' attendants were located. After taking a few steps, he dragged a chair over and sat down. Looking around, he greeted them. Then, he nodded his head at the robust, middle-aged man beside him. "Arthur, how do you do?" The robust, middle-aged man was slightly stunned. Good, Haber. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you." The situation eased up slightly. Although they didn't know why the other party's main force wasn't going to fight, the traditional nobles breathed a sigh of relief. Following which, those who negotiated continued to negotiate, those who quarreled continued to quarrel, and those who taught continued to teach. Perhaps only Philip, who was abnormally sitting in the corner, showed some changes. He glanced at Ares, who was sitting in the front row, and shook his head slightly before lowering his eyes. Naturally, Alex didn't know about this. Seeing that Arthur wasn't going to fight and was instead sitting with his bodyguard, Alex couldn't help but sigh in disappointment. He got up, walked around a few people beside him, and walked toward the door of the side hall. Going out during a negotiation was a very normal thing. As long as they weren't sitting in the first row of the negotiation table, there was no need to greet them. As for people like Alex, who had nothing to do with the negotiation, they wouldn't attract any attention. However, just as he was walking around the table, a clear voice entered his ears. "Alex, do you think you can still walk out today?" Alex paused and turned his head around. He looked at the female leader of the Gray Coat Army, who had been very quiet all this time. He pointed at himself in confusion. "Are you talking to me?" Creak. He pushed the side of the table, causing the long back chair to slide backwards. The legs of the chair rubbed against the terrazzo floor, creating an incomparably ear-piercing sound. Josiah got up and turned around. His eyes were filled with tenacity and forbearance as he said, "Today you will not go out." Silence. Dead silence. The sound of the chair rubbing against the floor had already caused everyone to frown and shut their mouths. The following words caused their expressions to freeze, leaving them dumbfounded. Among them, Simpson's expression was one of shock and astonishment. Just now, he had been talking to Josiah. After Arthur left, he could clearly feel the changes in the other party. Lowering his head, his chest heaved up and down a few times. At first, the rate of his breathing became more and more rapid, before finally slowing down. Biting his lips a few times, he gradually straightened his body. An aura that could not be seen, but could be felt continuously rising. Immediately after, he raised his head and spoke. A bone-chilling cold light flashed through his eyes. Vaguely, there was hatred and killing intent. "What's going on?" Scratching his head, Alex suddenly had a bad premonition in his heart. However, on the surface, he still maintained a carefree appearance. "There's something wrong with your condition. Don't tell me you're sick. Hey, Philip, why don't you come out and take care of it?" The atmosphere relaxed. What Alex said was rather amusing. Everyone knew that Philip had lost all face after being rejected by this woman. However, Philip, who had been quietly staying in the corner today, did not continue the conversation. Hearing Alex's words, he sighed and raised his head. "I'm sorry, Alex. You've gone too far this time. Even I can't save you." Alex's face stiffened. The uneasiness in his heart grew even stronger. The surrounding nobles looked at each other in dismay. They were all somewhat baffled. Was this for real? "Haha, all right. Raising his head and laughing loudly, Alex spread out his palms and looked directly at Josiah with a helpless expression. "You have to give me a reason. Why can't I leave today? Someone told me before that you're actually an actor. Now I believe it." Josiah's eyes were fixed on Alex's face. However, even now, she was still unable to connect this somewhat boorish nobleman in front of her with words such as scheming and cunning. Exhaling, her eyes grew cold. "Why? I also wanted to know the reason from the beginning. Why were we ambushed for no reason? Why did Elderbaugh die? Why can't the real name be engraved on a tombstone?" After a pause, she continued, "Didn't you want the reason? This is the reason. Ambush. Elderbaugh. Tombstone. Really? I don't understand more and more. I guess that you wouldn't admit it. It doesn't matter. I'm not a court judge. This time, I only want to be an executioner. After saying this, Josiah directly waved her arms. Her long robe fluttered, and a few silver-white ribbons of water shot out rapidly like long silk. They directly wrapped around Alex's hands and feet, completely fixing him in place. Alex had reached the heavens in a single bound when he was young. From a poor commoner to a noble, he had long passed the optimal age to learn Do-Chi martial arts. Therefore, although he had brute strength, it was naturally not enough to break free from the shackles of an intermediate mage. "Sir, be careful. You dare." Bang, bang, bang. Loud shouts were followed by a series of concentrated hitting sounds. When the nobles turned their gazes away from the scene in a daze, they saw Tang In standing by the door with a smile on his face. Beside his feet were the scattered wooden planks of the bench and the unconscious middle-aged man called Haber. "Haha, sorry to disturb you. It's just a small accident. You can continue." Chapter 443. One side used magic to trap people, while the other side took down guards. At this moment, the nobles finally came back to their senses. It seemed that the other party's so-called negotiation this time was aimed at Ares. Naturally, the nobles did not like Ares. The reason was simple. Even if it was a small farm with only a few poor families, it had its own rules. Not to mention a deep-rooted noble class that had lasted for thousands of years. Ares's maverick way of doing things was very different from the nobles' usual elegant demeanor. Naturally, the nobles could not stand it. Among them, Simpson, Ronald, and the other old nobles were the most dissatisfied. It could be said that they had been immersed in the noble circle their entire lives, and had become the guardians of this rule. Naturally, they could not stand a different kind of noble like Ares the most. Ever since Ares decided to walk down this path, he disapproved of the lessons of those who took advantage of their seniority. Therefore, the moment the noble negotiation team set off from the capital city, the relationship between them was at its worst. Of course, because of the current special situation, Ronald and the other new nobles could not watch Ares be killed in front of them. Therefore, after Josiah took a crossbow from Dave, they hurriedly dissuaded him. "Wait!" After organizing his words, Ronald hurriedly waved his hand. "Don't be impulsive. Is there some misunderstanding here? Let's talk." Misunderstanding. With the crossbow loaded, Josiah tilted his head and said calmly, "You want to stop me?" Ronald was slightly stunned and spread out his hands. You have to at least explain the reason. He is a noble." "Noble? He." After sneering twice, Josiah's expression suddenly turned cold. "What's wrong with nobles? Can't nobles be killed? Are commoners born sheep? Should they be killed at will?" "Sigh. That's not what I meant." Ronald's face was somewhat bitter, and he hesitated to speak. To be honest, if the situation was different and there were no other people present, he would not care about Ares's life or death. But as he said, Ares was a noble, and there were so many pairs of eyes here. If Ares was killed by Josiah for no reason, then this negotiation could only come to an end. Just at this moment, Ares, who was in a daze due to being suddenly tied up, suddenly raised his head and laughed heartily. Shaking his head, he appeared to be ridiculing. "Interesting, really interesting. I didn't expect that when Ares, met with misfortune, there would actually be someone who would step out to dissuade me. Furthermore, it's someone from a new aristocrat. This is really fucking interesting." She paused and stopped laughing. She looked straight into Josiah's eyes with a fierce expression. "I'm standing right here, magician girl. Come and kill me if you have the guts." Pursing his lips, Josiah did not hesitate. He raised the crossbow in his hand and aimed it straight at Ares' heart. "Come on." "No. Damn it, I can't be impulsive." Calm down. Think about the negotiation." The sound of benches crashing to the ground could be heard. All the new nobles hurriedly got up and pressed their hands to the air as if they were comforting them. Some of the more powerful nobles wanted to immediately rush over. but they were stopped by Dave and the others who also got up. Simpson and the other traditional nobles sat in their chairs in a daze, looking at the situation in front of them in a daze. Of course, there were also some who were more quick-witted. After thinking about the consequences of their actions, they immediately looked fervently at the crossbow, as if urging it to shoot. In the midst of this chaos, Josiah took a deep breath, lowered his eyes, and lowered the crossbow. Ares' eyes flickered, and his expression relaxed. Phew! Seeing this, Ronald and the others could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. Just as they were about to persuade him again, suddenly whoosh! Puff! The bowstring vibrated, and an arrow was instantly shot out. Ah! Ares howled in pain as he knelt on one knee. Lowering his head to look at the arrow that had sunk into his right thigh and the blood that was spurting out, his face contorted. However, no matter how much he struggled in pain, the silver-white water ribbons on his arms, legs, and waist firmly nailed him to the ground, unable to move. The scene suddenly became quiet, and all the nobles were stunned. She actually really made a move. You are indeed very smart. Perhaps I am overthinking it. With an expressionless face, Joshua loaded the second crossbow bolt. He looked at Ares indifferently and took a step forward. No matter what, I won't let you die so easily. Old Man Ba took 5 crossbow bolts and sacrificed himself. I'll pay you back one by one. Bitch. Huff. Ares panted heavily. He no longer had his usual carefree appearance, and his expression was dark and ruthless, like a caged beast. This was not an act, but compared to the external pain, he was more concerned about the doubts in his heart. Since the other party dared to make a move, it was obvious that she knew something, but he did not know what the problem was. As if he did not hear anything, Josiah loaded the crossbow and pulled the bowstring. Don't you want to know the reason? Since there is still some time, I will tell you a few things. After saying this, he looked around at the nobles and said again, 10 days ago, you and Philip arrived at Mountain Stream City ahead of time. 2 days later, the negotiation team arrived, and all of you stayed in this hotel. No one suspected anything. Whoosh! The crossbow arrow was shot again and nailed into Ares' left thigh. However, perhaps because of his complicated thoughts, Ares only groaned and knelt down on both knees this time, and did not make any unnecessary struggles or screams. But in fact, when you arrived at Mountain Stream City, you already came to this hotel and made some arrangements. It is easy to guess. This is the city center, and it is the most high-end hotel in Mountain Stream City. With a little guidance, the negotiation team will definitely stay here. Am I right? Ares opened his mouth, and his eyes were slightly absent-minded. A few drops of sweat slowly slid down from his temples. After that, a traitor appeared on our side, and you bribed him with a large sum of money. After the second negotiation, we were ambushed by the men in black. Oh, your family's death warriors. Needless to say, our target of suspicion was naturally the nobles. Then, the hotel was continuously assassinated. The scene was flawless, and the murderer seemed to be an ethereal soul. But in fact, it was just someone pretending to be a waiter and drug the tea. This way, the murderer naturally did not encounter any resistance. Of course, with so many nobles dead, the target of suspicion was definitely us. You were very smart. You made us put our sights on each other. You are also very good at pretending. In the whole thing, you're the only one who escaped, and no one will suspect you. At this point, the new nobles on Ronald's side and the traditional nobles led by Simpson could not help but look at each other, and their expressions gradually changed. No matter how stupid they were, they knew that something was wrong. They shifted their gazes and finally fixed their eyes on Ares. Huff! Huff! Ares slowly bent his legs and sat on the ground. He raised his head, and his face was somewhat pale due to excessive blood loss. He grinned as he panted. After saying so much, huff. Where's the evidence? If there is none, I will not admit it. If there is, will you admit it? No. As expected of Ares. Even in such a situation, he was still able to control himself. His deathly pale face naturally couldn't be said to be unchanged, but his speech was free and easy. Josiah picked up the crossbow again and aimed at his arm, but then he put it down and suddenly asked, "Since you were so calm, then do you remember how long it has been since you were trapped?" Ares raised his eyebrows in surprise, and then the corner of his mouth rose. "About 5 minutes. Why? You want to calculate the time of my death?" "That's about it." Josiah shook his head and said indifferently, "Don't you want evidence? Later you can." Before he finished speaking, suddenly, boom, the huge explosion sounded like it was right next to their ears. The ground trembled, and the windows in the side hall shattered instantly. Caught off guard, everyone subconsciously retreated in a hurry and fell down. Cries of surprise rose and fell one after another. "I heard it." After he finished speaking, Josiah was also stunned. He then shrugged and looked at Ares, whose face suddenly darkened. "Isn't it a coincidence? You should know where the explosion came from, right?" The corner of Ares' mouth twitched, and he opened his mouth, but in the end, he did not say anything. On the other side, someone had already rushed to the window and exclaimed, "It's from the attic. A place on the first floor was blown up." "Hey, the garrison cavalry came so quickly. At least they are punctual." Tang Yin, who was at the door, smiled slightly. This was the agreement between him and Bose. The black-clothed man in the secret room belonged to Bose, but the content that Bose had previously investigated and Ares belonged to him. "Not saying? Then I will say it for you." Retracting his gaze from Ares, Josiah looked at all the nobles around him and said loudly, "That is your room, Ares. The place that was blown up was the entrance to the secret room that you had dug a long time ago. There are the family's men of sacrifice that ambushed us and assassinated the nobles." Whoosh! Although they had already expected this at first, when this guess was really said out loud, all the nobles were instantly furious. Thinking about their dead companions, thinking about the days of fear they had for the past few days, they wished that their gazes could turn into arrows when they looked at Ares. "Why?" Ronald's old face turned red as he questioned loudly across the negotiation table. However, Ares clearly ignored him and shook his head in realization. "Oh, so there was a problem with the butler." "No, if we push it further, it's Philip." "Yes, that woman, Loris, and the seal." "Ha, it was really a good scheme." As if he had figured something out, Ares' face actually had traces of strange joy. "You admit it?" Josiah tightened his grip on the crossbow in his hand and took another step forward, walking in front of Ares. "Of course not. Is there any meaning to this?" Ares raised his head, closed his eyes, and said calmly, There are some things that as long as they are not said by me, they will never become evidence or be used against others. From a certain point of view, you also don't want me to admit it. Come, for this reason, don't shoot arrows one by one. Just give me a quick death." Josiah was silent. Then, he pursed his lips and shook his head. "That's your problem. I only think that you don't deserve to be forgiven." Whoosh! The crossbow arrow pierced deeply into Ares' lower abdomen. Without any hesitation, the crossbow arrow was shot again. This time, the target was the right side of Ares' chest. Whoosh puff! After being hit by 2 crossbow arrows in a row, especially the last one on the right side of Ares' chest, Ares fell backwards and spat out a mist of blood. With this kind of injury, even if he was not attacked again, he would still die after a while. However, Josiah was not moved at all. With an indifferent expression, he loaded the last crossbow arrow, walked to Ares' side, and pointed it directly between his eyebrows. "Why?" Everyone's condemnation came to a halt because of Josiah's brazen actions. Only Simpson's loud roar was left. Cough, cough. Ares spat out blood and turned his head slightly to look at Simpson and the group of traditional nobles. A mocking smile hung on the corner of his mouth as he sighed helplessly. "Because of you bunch of idiots, whoosh." Chapter 444. In the end, the negotiations couldn't continue. Of course, no one left immediately, including Josiah's people. After all, they had killed an aristocrat. Even if there was a reason for it, they couldn't just clap their hands, throw away their crossbows, and casually say everyone disperse and walk away. Moreover, now wasn't the time to leave. Although Alex's head had been pierced by an arrow, the family's death warriors in his room had caused a lot of trouble. It should be said that Bose's arrangement wasn't a problem. He had blasted open the door with explosive crystals, and the rows of archers had blocked the gap. It was a classic case of killing turtles in a jar. However, the family's death warriors didn't fail to live up to their name. They stepped forward one after another to withstand the rain of arrows, and used their flesh and blood to push open a gap. Finally, for senior warrior-level death warriors rushed out. Thus, the situation became lively. These death warriors had serious injuries on their bodies. Under the entanglement of Bose and the Bugnes, they couldn't leave the vicinity of the hotel. Bose and the others were fighting one against two. In addition, the cavalry under their command wasn't of much help. They couldn't take down the other party for a while. In the end, the two sides rolled around in the attic and fought fiercely. This caused the hotel owner, who had rushed over to stomp his feet, and almost burst into tears. In the end, Ronald couldn't stand it anymore and ordered the royal guards to send out 2 senior warrior captains and 2 peak intermediate warrior-level warriors. After these people stepped forward to help, they finally killed the 4 family's death warriors. However, even with such an absolute advantage, Bose and the others still paid the price of minor injuries. The 4 royal guards were even more miserable. 2 were dead, and the other 2 were seriously injured. Such a result made the faces of the surrounding aristocrats turn ugly. Death warriors weren't rare. Powerful aristocrats would raise them. Whether it was to use them or to dispose of them as cannon fodder, they were very handy. However, there were very few who could reach the senior warrior level. At the very least, with the Alex family's ability, they shouldn't be able to raise them. Thus, the situation was enough to make people ponder. However, the aristocrats didn't have time to think about this problem for the time being. They changed to a side hall and discussed for a long time. Finally, at noon, Josiah led his people to leave. The next few days were peaceful. Mountain Stream City did not cause any strong earthquakes because of this incident, and the 2 sides did not continue to hold open negotiations. It was as if nothing had happened. Everything returned to the calm state of a few days ago. Of course, the lack of open negotiations did not mean that the new nobles had no secret dealings with Josiah. It could be said that not only did the negotiations in the past few days not stop, the frequency had even increased. This afternoon, at a roadside tavern. Leaving so soon? Why don't you stay for a few more days? Sigh, it's just a matter of time. With Bose here, I can't do any business at all. Why don't we leave early so that we don't fall into his hands? At the table, Tang Yin, Philip, and Jack each sat on one side of the table and drank from time to time. In the past few days, Tang had taken the time to introduce Jack to Philip. The two of them, who both had wretched characteristics, got along very well. In just a few days, they had completely evolved into acquaintances. It could be said that they regretted not having met earlier. However, today was the day to part. After staying in Mountain Stream City for a few days, Jack decided to change places. After all, Bose gave him too much pressure. Staying here for one more day made him feel like he was on tenterhooks. This was personal freedom, and Tang Yin naturally would not force it. He raised his glass and asked, "Then where are you going next?" Jack shook his head and clinked his glass. "I don't know. Maybe I'll go back to the south. The north is too poor, and the nobles are the same. It's not worth it." He paused and drank the wine in one gulp. TSK, but I can't say for sure. We'll see when the time comes. I think you should go to the capital. There are nobles and rich merchants everywhere. With your skills, you can walk around the streets and have everything you need. On the side, Philip did not express any disgust towards Jack's profession. On the contrary, he lazily suggested ideas, not at all thinking that he was rich. Jack touched his chin and looked forward to it. I'll go there when I have the chance. Then it's settled. You just have to mention my name when you come to the capital. It'll definitely work. Maybe someone will even give you money. Damn, there's such a thing? Jack's eyes widened. He was obviously shocked. Of course, there were a few times when I was dragged to drink with girls by my friends, but the waiters at the door wouldn't let me in no matter what. They gave me money and made me kneel, saying that they were afraid that I would kidnap the girls inside. Damn it. Philip slammed the table gloomily and drank a mouthful of wine. Uh-huh. Tang-in and Jack were stunned when they heard this. Then, they could not help but raise their heads and laugh. After drinking a few more cups and getting a little tipsy, Jack simply stood up. He did not say anything and waved his hand and left in a carefree manner. After seeing Jack's figure quickly disappear into the crowd on the street, Tang-in withdrew his gaze and raised his head to drink. He did not feel anything. He was already lucky to be able to meet an old friend in the vast sea of people. There was no need to ask for more. Raising his eyebrows, Tang-in looked at Philip, who seemed to be deep in thought. He asked casually, "What are you thinking about?" Philip slapped his forehead and was a little distressed. "I don't know why, but every time I see Jack, I feel like I've forgotten something, but I can't remember it at the moment." Tang-in did not mind. "Then don't think about it for now. Tell me about the matter at your hotel." "Well, about Alex, I'm sorry." Oh, it's okay. I'm actually not that close with him. It's just that there are too few different nobles in the capital, so people like to put the two of us together and talk about things." Philip was stunned for a moment and shook his head as he explained. "That's good. I was worried that Alex's death would have a negative impact on you." Philip waved his hand. "How could that be? In any case, I'm nominally a new noble, and he's a traditional noble. Well, even though he hid it well." After a pause, Philip continued, "But Alex's identity as a traditional noble can't be exposed. Simpson and Ronald, those old foxes, can probably guess it, but they don't dare to say much. With so many nobles dead, how could Simpson and the others dare to admit it? And the origins of those men of sacrifice are suspicious. I'm guessing that Ronald will definitely think in the direction of His Highness. It involves the struggle for imperial power, so he won't dare to mention it before he returns to the capital. Both sides have their own misgivings. No one is willing to unveil this heavy veil, so they can only dig up some soil and bury it. Ha! Speaking of that, Alex, he's really thoughtful. Previously, he went on a killing spree and wiped out the traditional nobles and the new nobles in one fell swoop. Now that he's dead, it's natural that he doesn't belong to either side. Well, I think both sides want to blame Alex's death on the previous assassination. As for the murderers, of course, it's those men in black who were completely wiped out. In the end, it's better to be dead. The dead can't speak, so they're the best scapegoats." Tang-in nodded after listening. These complicated political struggles had nothing to do with them. Now that they had taken revenge, and it didn't affect the negotiations, it was naturally the best outcome. By the way, there haven't been any open negotiations for the past few days. Didn't Simpson and the others suspect anything? Philip couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. He said in a relaxed manner, Of course they suspect something, but I think they're a little disheartened now. They came all the way here with orders to disrupt the negotiations, but they didn't expect that there was an even more ruthless person hiding by their side who actually used the method of killing their companions to disrupt the negotiations. How disappointing." Paused for A while smacked his lips. TSK, but this can't be blamed on Alex. Do you still remember what he said to Simpson and the others before he died? "It's because of you idiots." How resentful. Originally, if it weren't for the fact that Simpson and the others were so bad that Alex couldn't see any hope of completing the mission after the second negotiation, he might not have used such drastic means. Really, it's not afraid of a demon-like opponent, but a pig-like teammate. Tang-in chuckled when he heard this. Why do I feel that this pig-like teammate is really likable? Because we're in different positions. If you were Alex, you would also want to kill someone. At least find a way to kill someone with a borrowed knife. Philip's words suddenly paused. Bang! He slammed the table and stood up. He grimaced as if he had a toothache. Damn it! I finally remember. That Jack took away my dagger before, and he hasn't returned it to me yet. Tang-in was stunned at first, But then he remembered that when he first met Jack, he did indeed take away the dagger under Philip's pillow. He rubbed his forehead, speechless. It's just a dagger. Although it looks sharp, you still care about that? Sighed. Knowing that it was hopeless to track down Jack now, Philip sighed and sat down. He shook his head and muttered, "That's not an ordinary dagger." Chapter 445. The cold and bleak autumn wind rustled in the white and gray mottled sky. Square lattice buildings, tangled and complicated streets, ant-like people moving about in the morning mist, and occasionally galloping horses galloping on the wide and empty streets. All kinds of things, bustling and desolate, pieced together to form this lively and fragrant world. This was a world that seemed to be whole, but was actually divided into many parallel spaces. Creatures of every level strictly guarded their own living habits and were stingy or afraid to step into other areas. In the eyes of the aristocrats, there was no hardship of the poor. When the poor looked up, they could not experience the comfort and luxury of the aristocrats' resentment, curiosity, anticipation. As time passed, they would eventually fade away. Very few people would continue to pay attention to things that did not involve them. So the battle at the front line, the stalemate in the 100,000 Mountains, and so on, eventually became the topic of idle gossip. Of course, there would always be some people who were closely related to each other. They would silently push for things in places where the public couldn't see them. Just like the negotiations in Mountain Stream City. It was destined to be a secret, but it still existed. Especially after the recent clearing of obstacles, the progress had become even faster. To be honest, what happened next had little to do with Tang Un. It was not that he did not want to help, but his role was limited. It was important to know one's own limits, and Tang Un was very clear about his own ability. He could only provide some scattered information about the world. It was undeniable that this was also very important, but to turn it into practical action and ultimately produce results, it was really something that he could not do, especially after the incident with Ares. Simpson and the other traditional aristocrats had completely quieted down. They could not control the negotiations in secret, and the negotiations in the open did not inspire any fighting spirit. In the end, they pushed it away as much as they could, and turned to frequently attend the invitations of the aristocrats in the city. In this way, Tang Un's ability to harm people had no room to play, and he was even more free. The early negotiations were mainly to discuss the conditions on Josiah's side. There were many successes. Although some of the conditions had changed in form, Josiah and the others naturally did not mind. They only cared about the practical results. Of course, there were also some that could not be discussed and could only be temporarily put aside. Regarding this, Rosa had already explained it in the letter before, so Josiah and the others didn't force him. Overall, Ronald and the others made a lot of concessions in the negotiations. Although the explanation was to show their sincerity, Josiah and the others naturally did not believe it, and were also guessing the other party's intentions. Finally, a week later, both sides had discussed most of the conditions, and Ronald finally used Philip's mouth to reveal their intentions. The Gray Coat Army would have to surrender or disband most of its troops, and they would be given 3 parliamentary votes. A single stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. In Josiah's secret organization, other than Enoch, Dave, and the others in the upper echelon were all poor people. Perhaps they didn't have any foresight, but they were very clear about one thing. The Gray Coat Army's current status, including this negotiation, was achieved by the soldiers of the Gray Coat Army. Therefore, they naturally objected to these conditions without even thinking about it, and even cursed out loud. Josiah was also very clear about this. So although there was the temptation of parliamentary votes, he still flatly refused, and the negotiations reached a stalemate. Those with a bit of judgment knew that this stalemate was basically impossible to break. Not to mention other things, just the issue of trust was enough to put both sides into an endless loop. Ronald's side had a justifiable reason on the surface. Since the Gray Coat Army had already achieved its purpose, what was the use of keeping the troops? On the other hand, the Gray Coat army was very wary of the nobles. They were worried that once they handed over the troops, would the previous negotiation still be valid? Would the Bran even turn around and kill them? This was purely a confrontation of perceptions and impressions, and there was no room for reason at all. Both sides would quarrel almost every time they met, but of course, in the end, no one could convince the other. It was just a waste of saliva, and there was no progress in the negotiations. You think too highly of me. Your question is obviously to make things difficult for me. Tang, you don't have a solution either? TSK, this is not a problem of a solution at all. If you want to ask about a way to refute the other party, then it's simple. I can use some means to confuse the minds of those old nobles at the negotiating table, and even make them think that what we said is reasonable. But this is useless for the outcome of the negotiation. After the negotiation table, the other party will still be able to deny it when they wake up. At dusk, in the courtyard behind the residence of the contact point, there were yellowish leaves all over the ground. Under the wall on the leeward side, Tang In and Josiah sat on 2 stone stools. Looking at Josiah, who was a little startled, Tang In shook his head and spread out his hands. If what you want to know is just my opinion, I can say something. In the end, the most important thing in war is to seek political results, not military success. Leader Lhasa is a person of great wisdom. She tried her best to facilitate this negotiation because she understood this principle. From his point of view, what Ronald and the others said is not wrong. Well, by the way, Philip is not wrong either. He's just a messenger. You can ask Dave and the others to stop scolding him. Where's I? Oh, the Gray Coat army can use this to achieve their long-cherished purpose in one fell swoop. And they can also have 3 parliamentary votes, participate in the political power, and better seek benefits for the civilians. So, you mean to say yes to the other party? Josiah pondered for a moment, then looked up and said, but will they not admit it after the fact? It's not like that. You still don't understand what I mean. Well, wait for me to finish. Tang In waved his hand and interrupted Josiah. I'm just analyzing the current situation for you to hear. It's a different perspective. As you said just now, you doubt the credibility of the other party. This is a matter of position, and it's difficult to make a fundamental change. He paused and swept away the leaves on his body. If you want peace or other things, you have to prepare for war. The Gray Coat army and the Bran have been at war for so many years, and many people have died in it. Brothers, husbands, fathers, and sons. Of course, the other party is the same. The resentment is too great, and there is no way to quell it. The purpose of the Gray Coat army has never changed, but at this time, many things are no longer up to the people. Leader Lhasa, being able to facilitate the negotiation, is already putting her personal prestige on the table. If you ask the Gray Coat army to give up on the army, Leader Lhasa's control will directly collapse. Well, she won't do that either. His voice faded away, and the setting sun in the west struggled to cast its last few rays of light into the courtyard, leaving a thick and heavy stroke on the yellowish leaves on the ground. It was gorgeous and tragic. Moments later, after digesting these words, Josiah's expression was somewhat confused. Your opinion is that we can't agree to it, and we can't not agree to it either, Tang In nodded and sighed. This is a dilemma. There is only one choice. Perhaps the Gray Coat army's ambition is not big enough. If I persevered, instead of relying on Bran, I could build my own empire. Haha, that last part is just my imagination. It doesn't really mean anything. The chances of that path succeeding are close to 0. Turning his head to look at the still confused Josiah, Tang In stretched out his hand and waved in front of his eyes. Don't think about it. In the end, whether there is a solution to this matter or not, it is not up to you and me to decide. Well, let's wait first. In the next few days, you can finish the negotiations. After that, you don't have to worry about the other side. Ronald and the others must have considered the situation. He is more anxious than us. In the end, it will probably be between Leader Lhasa and the second Prince of the Bran. Coming back to his senses, Josiah nodded slightly. That's the only way. Well, let's temporarily shift our attention away from the stalemate and keep looking towards the northwest, a few thousand miles away, in an unknown small town. The struggling sunset finally lost its strength. It completely retracted its light and buried itself under the horizon. Dusk fell. Suddenly, boom, in an inconspicuous house on a remote street. There was a loud explosion. The ground trembled and the airwaves rolled. The walls, doors, windows, tiles, and so on were all swept away. The house was almost razed to the ground. Bang! The explosion had just stopped when a black shadow suddenly rushed out from the broken stones and rotten wood. It spat out 2 mouthfuls of blood and looked a little embarrassed. However, the figure was extremely agile when it landed. In a flash, it ran across the ruins and entered the complicated alleyways. As if it was very familiar with the terrain, the figure turned and turned in the alleyways. It was very agile, like a fish in water. But even so, it did not stop. It was still running wildly, as if it was running for its life. Although its face could not be seen, its fear could be felt. It looked back from time to time, as if there was a prehistoric giant beast chasing after it. After a while, the figure squatted down in the shadow of a wall. It should be said that its hiding skill was not bad. Now, even if someone passed by, they might not be able to find a person hiding here. A few minutes later, there was no sound around. Suddenly, huff, huff. The sound of heavy breathing came from the shadow, mixed with the sound of swallowing saliva. It seemed that there was still some scruples. This movement only lasted for more than 10 seconds. The black shadow stood up with the help of the wall, shook its head, and turned the corner. The black shadow suddenly shook. Its legs were suspended in the air like a statue. At the end of the alley was a street. There was no light nearby, but it could still see a long-haired figure standing quietly in front of it. It seemed that it had been waiting for a long time. Bang! The previous black shadow's body kept trembling. It leaned against the cold wall and slowly slid down. It no longer had any intention of running away. "You're not running anymore?" The long-haired figure said in an indifferent tone. No. The black shadow stammered as if it wanted to explain something. But in the end, it lowered its head and gave up. It said sadly, "I have no choice. Leader Yimo, I have no choice. I don't want to betray you, but the Temple of Light, I'm not interested in these things." The long-haired figure approached the black shadow. After interrupting the other party, he leaned over and looked directly into the black shadow's eyes. "You know what I want to know, right?" The black shadow subconsciously avoided the other party's gaze and nodded while trembling. "Very good." After a while, the long-haired figure walked out of the alley with his head down. It seemed that he was thinking about something. After walking for a while, he finally stopped outside the range of the illuminating crystal pillar. He raised his head, his silver hair dazzling. A middle-aged man with a cold face. Mountain Stream City. Bose, you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.